Chapter 532. Haha. The great immortal Zhen Yuan smiled and looked back at the Taoist in indigo. The great trial has arrived, and the heavenly Tao is unstable. If Yi Xian is really the seventh heavenly Tao saint, all pre-saints will have no hope of becoming a saint. You understand this, don't you? The immortal scripture. Outside the three realms, he was able to cultivate to the zenith heaven realm, and has such terrifying combat strength. If I'm not wrong, he should have already walked on the path of proving Tao through strength? The Taoist in indigo said solemnly. Proving Tao through strength? The great immortal Zhen Yuan muttered to himself, and then laughed self-deprecatingly. His eyes were absent-minded. Pangu opened the sky and Hongjun preached the Tao. No one has ever proved Tao through strength because it's a dead end. You overestimate him. You have to know that Tao ancestor Hongjun only killed 3 corpses to become a saint. Even if he wanted to use his strength to prove his Tao, he would still fail. Although Yi Xian doesn't cultivate the 3 realms technique, if he wants to use his strength to prove his Tao, that's simply a delusion. The Taoist in indigo held his breath when he heard the great immortal Zhen Yuan's confident words. He said, "But the immortal elemental herb is too precious. Even you can't bear to eat it. If Yi Xian gets it, it will definitely speed up his step into the pre-saint realm. Even if he gives up the path of proving Tao through strength, if he gets the last strand of primordial violet qi, I'm afraid he will be the 7th saint in the world, and our path to becoming a saint will be completely cut off." Haha, you're wrong. If becoming a saint is so easy, why are we still shackled in the pre-saint realm since the creation of the world? Today, I gave the immortal elemental herb to this child because I want to see how far he can go. Perhaps he is the opportunity for me to become a saint. The great immortal Zhen Yuan smiled. But you schemed against the Empyrean fairy and made her lose her virginity. This matter will definitely be known by Nuwa. Aren't you afraid that Nuwa will punish you? The Taoist in indigo said in a low voice. Haha. Grand immortal Zhen Yuan roared with laughter. When his eyes opened and closed, the world seemed to be shattering, and the space in the surroundings was in extreme chaos. The terrifying scene was too shocking, and it was impossible to describe with words. Although Nuwa is a saint, and is known to be immortal and indestructible, she should know that the great tribulation of heaven and earth has already begun. Even saints are at risk of dying in this tribulation. Why would a mere Empyrean fairy come out to condemn me personally? At this point, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled strangely and muttered. Moreover, Yi Xian is the main character of this calamity. Nuwa is well aware of this. This can be considered as me pulling strings for Nuwa and planting good karma between her and Yi Xian. She should be thanking me. Yin and Yang, heaven and earth, the cheese of heaven and earth, the combination of yin and yang, growing and multiplying without end. Ripples appeared in the void. Yi Xian and Qinyu took a step forward and saw 16 characters appear in the world of yin and yang. Woo woo woo. All of a sudden, the yin and yang qi of heaven and earth manifested in the void and violently blew towards Yi Xian. The terrifying fluctuations seemed to be able to melt a person's flesh and destroy their soul. The yin and yang qi were so terrifying that even the Daluo Jingxian could not touch them. In the face of such terrifying power, Yi Xian did not hesitate. He grabbed the Empyrean fairy's slender hand and circulated the immortal power in his body around the two of them. A pink light screen turned into a protective shield that enveloped the two of them. Woo woo woo. The yin and yang qi blew past like a breeze. They did not harm Yi Xian and the Empyrean fairy at all. However, an inexplicable restlessness rose in their hearts. The strange feeling was indescribable, but it was like a cat scratching their hearts, making their hearts itch. The strange feeling in her heart made the Empyrean fairy's embarrassment and anger disappear. Her face turned slightly red. Yi Xian, let go of me. There seems to be something wrong here. Release my cultivation, and I will help you. Hearing the Empyrean fairy's words, Yi Xian also felt that something was wrong. However, how could he release her restriction? The Empyrean fairy was already extremely angry with him. If he really released her restriction, who knew what would happen? Since they had already entered the yin and yang world, Yi Xian could not let anything happen to him. Cut the crap and follow me. Ignoring the Empyrean fairy's embarrassed and angry face, Yi Xian pulled her towards the depths of the yin and yang world. The world of yin and yang was a space of its own. There were no living beings here, and it was like a desert. There was only the boundless yin and yang qi that danced and circled in this space, causing it to seem extremely desolate. At this moment, the two of them were at the periphery of the yin and yang world. The yin and yang qi was not very dense. However, in the depths of this small world, the yin and yang qi was so dense that it seemed to have solidified and was extremely sticky. Looking at the scene in front of him, Yi Xian's face darkened. He said, "The elemental dispersing immortal Ganoderma was born from the yin and yang qi. According to the grand deity Zhen Yuan, it should be in the depths of this small world. There are many restrictions and killing formations in this small world. Hold my hand tightly and don't let go. Otherwise, you and I will definitely be swallowed by the yin and yang qi." Hearing Yi Xian's words, the Empyrean fairy's embarrassment and anger disappeared. She also knew that the yin and yang qi was no joke. If the two of them were really trapped under the endless yin and yang qi, even if they were the Daoyuo Jingxian, their souls would be scattered and they would die. The chaos and yin and yang qi were not just words. They were the most original and terrifying forces in the world. At this moment, the Empyrean fairy was held hostage by Yi Xian. She had no way out. She could only follow Yi Xian carefully into the depths of the small world. Their fingers interlocked, blocking the yin and yang qi. This made her feel ashamed and angry, but she could only helplessly hold hands with Yi Xian. After all, if they were separated, they would definitely suffer a great calamity. What a pity! The two of them did not realize that as they went deeper, the yin and yang qi around them became denser. They only thought that this change was caused by the overflow of their immortal energy. What they did not know was that the yin and yang qi were born from the creation of the world. One of them was masculine, and the other was feminine. They were in accordance with the laws of yin and yang. Even if there was no immortal energy circulating around them, the yin and yang qi would not harm them. The yin and yang world was formed by the grand deity Zhen Yuan, by gathering the yin and yang qi of heaven and earth. It contained great danger. In fact, Yi Xian did not know that he did not need to enter the small world with the Empyrean fairy. The grand deity Zhen Yuan, as a quasi-sage, could have given him the elemental dissolving immortal Ganoderma. However, the grand deity Zhen Yuan obviously had his own motives. He only told Yi Xian that if he entered the small world, the yin and yang qi would be out of balance, and the elemental dissolving immortal Ganoderma would be destroyed. Of course, Yi Xian was not stupid. He only believed a little of the grand deity Zhen Yuan's explanation. However, since the grand deity Zhen Yuan had said so, Yi Xian could only bring the Empyrean fairy into the small world. For his own cultivation, Yi Xian felt that this risk was worth taking. He also believed that no matter what Zhen Yuanzi's motives were, he would not harm him now. After all, Zhen Yuanzi was a quasi-sage. If he really wanted to harm him, he would have attacked him just now. He would not even have the strength to resist. Be careful. All of a sudden, the Empyrean fairy cried out in alarm. At this moment, the two of them had already reached the depths of the small world. A pink mist suddenly surrounded them, catching them off guard. Obviously, they had walked too quickly and finally triggered the restriction array of the yin and yang world. Hold on tight to my hand. Don't let go. Yi Xian growled. Chapter 533. The world spun and the scenery changed. A feeling of dizziness appeared in their minds. When Yi Xian and Xian Nu opened their eyes again, the scene before them caused Yi Xian to be stunned. As for the Nine Heavens' mysterious maiden, she was blushing to the extreme. In a valley of peach blossoms, there was a pool with rippling blue waves. Unbearable illusions appeared one after another, and there were even sounds that could stir one's heartstrings coming from the pool, causing endless lust to rise in one's heart. Looking at the scene in front of them, strange feelings grew in their hearts. Their faces were flushed, and their minds were rippling. When they looked at each other, there was a spark of lust in their eyes. This situation made the two of them completely stunned on the spot, and their faces were flushed red. Feeling that something was wrong, the Empyrean fairy blushed and screamed. Her slender hand that was being held by Yi Xian was about to let go, and all kinds of distracting thoughts were born in her heart. The Empyrean Fairy's piercing voice woke Yi Xian up. Feeling the Empyrean Fairy's struggling hand, Yi Xian's face flushed red, and he shouted, "Calm down, don't be confused by the illusions." As he said that, Yi Xian's immortal power circulated around their bodies, and the hand that was holding the Empyrean Fairy became stronger. It was fine if Yi Xian didn't circulate his immortal power, but when he did, it directly affected the immortal light around the Empyrean Fairy. A pink miasma suddenly enveloped the two of them, and directly covered them. It should be known that this small world was full of yin and yang qi. Yi Xian and the Empyrean Fairy were a man and a woman, and they were perfectly compatible with the great Tao of yin and yang. If the two of them carefully retreated and didn't circulate their immortal power, nothing would happen. But now, Yi Xian was deep inside the restriction, and there were even lewd illusions appearing around him. This caused the surrounding yin and yang qi to go berserk, and something called lust was born in their hearts. Their gazes met, unable to move away. Originally, the Nine Heavens' profound daughter was extremely beautiful, and she had always given Yi Xian a tyrannical desire to conquer her. At this moment, under the urging of the yin and yang energies, this was simply adding fuel to the fire. The sound of heavy breathing came from their mouths. Their faces were extremely red, and their bodies unconsciously moved closer to each other. The feeling of needing each other's comfort spread throughout their bodies. Their faces were getting closer and closer, and they were about to touch each other. It was as if in the next moment, heavenly lightning would strike and earth would erupt. All of a sudden, wisps of dark mist grew in the depths of Yi Xian's eyes, and a trace of hostility surged around his body. The immortal scripture operated rapidly, and the indestructible primordial spirit buzzed in his sea of consciousness. The merciless aura of the six desires made Yi Xian come back to his senses in an instant. At this moment, the Empyrean Fairy's holy temperament had disappeared, and her beautiful face was only an inch away from Yi Xian. Her beautiful eyes were already blurred, and she was looking at Yi Xian in a daze, as if she was waiting for something. Looking at the blurred eyes of the Empyrean Fairy, Yi Xian's heart burned with a raging flame, and he wished he could burn her to ashes. It was as if a voice was telling Yi Xian to get her, get her. Was the Empyrean Fairy beautiful? Very beautiful. She was the saintess of the three realms, who was comparable to the Moon Fairy. She was as pure as ice and as pure as jade, holy and noble, and no one in the three realms dared to blaspheme her. But now, the Empyrean Fairy had such a blurred look, which was a fatal temptation to Yi Xian. Her eyes were blurred, her face was charming, and her arrogant and cold exterior was no longer there. A unique fragrance of a woman was inhaled by Yi Xian, and he could not control his emotions. He only wanted to devour the prey in front of him, like a hungry tiger pouncing on a sheep. Damn it! A curse came from Yi Xian's mouth. He pushed the woman in front of him away fiercely, and the evil aura around him rose. The terrifying dark mist condensed in his hand, and turned into a heaven-breaking fist, which violently blasted toward the pool in front of him. Crack! The sound of a mirror shattering sounded, and the two felt the world spinning. The unbearable scene in front of them disappeared, and the two of them reappeared in the world of yin and yang. Ah! An ear-piercing scream came from the Empyrean Fairy. She regained consciousness, and the scene just now appeared in her mind, making her feel ashamed and angry. Bitch, stop screaming. If you fall into the restrictive spell again, I can't guarantee that I won't eat you in one bite. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was also red. Thinking about the scene just now, his mind was in turmoil. If the indestructible primordial spirit had not woken him up, he was very sure that he would have swallowed the Empyrean Fairy in front of him. Although Yi Xian had no feelings for women, he was still a man, and this could never be changed. Facing the cold and arrogant Empyrean Fairy, his heart was filled with the desire to conquer her. It was commendable that he could maintain his current state. Yi Xian's words caused the mysterious maiden of the Nine Heavens to gradually calm down. The two of them became even more silent, but their footsteps became even more careful, afraid that they would once again fall into the restriction formation. A day passed quickly. Along the way, There were many restrictive spells, but with their previous experience, the two of them avoided them without any danger. Phew! Yi Xian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and the fine sweat on his forehead flowed down his cheeks. Yi Xian swore that even in the 7,000 years of his cultivation, he had faced many life and death crises, but none of them were as thrilling as this. Along the way, Yi Xian could be said to be on tenterhooks, afraid that they would fall into the restrictive spell again. Looking at the scene in front of him, Yi Xian's gloomy face finally dissipated. In front of him, a clear pool of water appeared. The yin and yang energies were as thick as water, and a 9-leaf Ganoderma lucidum bloomed with brilliant starlight. It was rooted in the center of the pool, causing people to be intoxicated when they looked at it. Obviously, this was not an illusion, but something real. An essence-dispersing Ganoderma. Yi Xian's spirits rose greatly as he and the Empyrean fairy glanced at each other, and then they held each other's little hands as they walked slowly towards the pool. Even though the essence-dispersing Ganoderma was right before them, they didn't dare be careless in the slightest, because they were in the deepest depths of the world of yin and yang. The yin and yang qi in this space was dense to the extreme, and it seemed to have transformed into liquid that enveloped their bodies. Swish! Swish! The clear pool rippled as the essence-dispersing Ganoderma blossomed with starlight and swayed without end, causing it to seem extremely alluring. Merely the fragrance it emitted caused Yi Xian to feel the barrier at the 4th level of the golden immortal realm shake with a single breath. An essence-dispersing Ganoderma really is extraordinary. Yi Xian spoke with excitement. He was extremely sure that Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan didn't deceive him. This essence-dispersing Ganoderma was indeed capable of allowing him to break through to the 4th level of the golden immortal realm, and it would even allow his cultivation to obtain an unimaginable improvement. Yi Xian didn't hesitate any longer. He held the Empyrean fairy's little hand, and didn't care whether she was willing or not as he directly shot towards the essence-dispersing Ganoderma. Pooh! Yi Xian stretched out his palm, and pulled the essence-dispersing Ganoderma out of the pool, and the refreshing fragrance caused Yi Xian's spirits to be refreshed while an expression of delight suffused his face. Chapter 534. All of a sudden, without waiting for Yi Xian to recover from his joy, something that caused the two of them to be terrified happened. Rumble! The heavens and earth shook, and space-time distorted. Monstrous waves rose from the pool, and the entire yin and yang world shook uncontrollably. Endless yin and yang qi swept towards the two of them, and fused into one. The combined yin and yang aura turned into chaotic qi, that instantly fused into their bodies. Zhen Yuanzi, you old dog, how dare you scheme against me? Yi Xian roared. At this moment, he finally knew that he'd been tricked. From the beginning to the end, it wasn't that their fingers were connected, and their auras combined to block the yin and yang qi. Instead, it was because they were one man and one woman, one yin and one yang. When the immortal qi flowed through their bodies, it naturally created the embryonic form of the yin and yang qi. The boundless yin and yang qi naturally treated them like children, and wouldn't attack them. As Yi Xian continued to release his immortal qi, and fused with the Empyrean fairy's aura, the embryonic yin and yang qi around them grew stronger and stronger. When Yi Xian pulled out the essence-dissolving immortal Ganoderma, the world went completely berserk. The embryonic yin and yang qi formed by the two of them grew rapidly, and finally merged with the yin-yang world. If Yi Xian came here alone, he would be attacked by the yin and yang qi, but as long as he endured the pain, he would not be in too much danger with his origin immortal body. However, Yi Xian came here with the Empyrean fairy. Their combined yin and yang qi completely detonated the power of the yin-yang world. Yin and yang qi gave birth to all things. It was not only a manifestation of one kind of power, but also a kind of dual cultivation. Yi Xian had already understood that the essence-dissolving immortal Ganoderma was indeed a supreme treasure of the world. However, the essence-dissolving immortal Ganoderma in his hand was now releasing an extremely fiery power that directly stimulated the violent desire hidden in the depths of his heart to the extreme. Plop! At this moment, the boundless yin and yang qi invaded their bodies. The two of them, who had been floating in the air, instantly fell into the pool. The boundless yin and yang qi covered the pool. A cry of pain rang out in the pool, and then it was drowned out by violent panting sounds. Yin-yang heaven and earth. The yin and yang qi gradually calmed down, and the entire yin-yang heaven and earth became silent. The chaotic yin and yang qi also quieted down. All of a sudden, an ear-piercing scream broke the silence. Yi Xian, you insulted my chastity. If I don't kill you, I would have lived in vain. Rumble. Terrifying origin immortal light soared into the heavens, and a chilling aura of slaughter filled the world. Empyrean Fairy. This is just a misunderstanding. It's all Zhen Yuanzi's fault. A black figure transformed into a stream of light, and shot towards the exit of the yin-yang world. Yi Xian's clothes were disheveled, and his face was in an extremely sorry state. His footsteps didn't slow down in the slightest, and as the air surged, his face became extremely red. A white light rapidly chased after him. The Empyrean Fairy's clothes were disheveled, her face flushed, and her blue hair abnormally disheveled. Her graceful appearance after making love made her appear even more delicate and alluring. Where was her previous arrogance and holiness? But the Empyrean Fairy's face was filled with shame and indignation. Tears were constantly dripping from her eyes, and a hatred that could not be washed away by the 3 rivers, and the 4 seas leapt out from her eyes. Looking at the fleeing Yi Xian, the Empyrean Fairy was filled with grief and indignation, her eyes constantly flashing with killing intent. The cultivation that had been sealed by Yi Xian had already been broken by the impact of the yin and yang qis. Her palms rose and fell, and various origin immortal arts violently bombarded Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was ruthless and ruthless, he had still taken the Empyrean Fairy's body. He knew that he was in the wrong, and did not dare to retaliate. He could only increase his speed and flee toward the exit. He turned a deaf ear to the Empyrean Fairy's curses, but the embarrassment on his face only grew more and more obvious. Damn it! Zhen Yuanzi, that old dog! Yi Xian roared in his mind. If not for Zhen Yuanzi's scheme, how could he have done such a thing with the Empyrean Fairy? But as Yi Xian secretly cursed Zhen Yuanzi, he unconsciously licked his lips. As he thought about that sensual scene, Yi Xian's eyes became slightly intoxicated, and he felt a faint sense of pleasure. It must be known that Yi Xian had never touched a woman before, and the Empyrean Fairy was a devastatingly beautiful goddess of the 3 realms. She had truly brought him indescribable pleasure, and this made Yi Xian feel like he was craving for more. The 2 of them quickly arrived at the exit of the yin-yang world. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Xian stepped into the light barrier and vanished from the world. At this moment, the Empyrean Fairy clenched her teeth so hard that she bit her cherry lips so hard that a trace of blood flowed out. As she watched Yi Xian disappear from the yin-yang world, she quickened her pace and appeared in front of the light barrier in an instant. The continuous pursuit made the Empyrean Fairy feel physically uncomfortable. The pain of a woman's first time was like a bone-scraping knife that penetrated deep into her bones. At this moment, she wanted nothing more than to cut Yi Xian into 1,000 pieces to appease the hatred in her heart. Who was she? She was the Empyrean Fairy, born from the essence of heaven and earth. She was also the only disciple of the sage Nuwa. She was doted on by all, and had always been a solitary flower that did not take any men seriously. But today, she had lost her virginity to Yi Xian. This made her feel like she had fallen into a dream. She did not dare to imagine it, nor did she want to believe it. However, the faint pain in her body told the Empyrean Fairy that the erotic scene had indeed happened. Under the stimulation of the yin and yang qi, she was extremely active. Thinking of the embarrassing scene just now, the Empyrean Fairy wished she could find a hole to hide in. Crazily demanding and tyrannical conquering. Thinking of Yi Xian's lustful face, and his seemingly inexhaustible physical strength, the Empyrean Fairy felt her body heating up, and her mind fluctuating to the extreme. Phew! The Empyrean Fairy exhaled slightly. She tried her best to suppress her flustered emotions, tidied up her white clothes and messy hair, and quickly entered the light barrier to pursue Yi Xian. Inside the 5 Villages temple, the Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan had his hands behind his back and a smile on his face. When the yin-yang heaven and earth gate opened, Yi Xian walked out of the gate. An explosive immortal light slashed towards the grand immortal Zhen Yuan. Buzz! The heaven and earth in the sleeve was silent. The grand immortal Zhen Yuan did not seem to move at all. With a light flick of his sleeve, Yi Xian's attack turned him into nothingness. Young friend, please calm down. The grand immortal Zhen Yuan smiled. Zhen Yuanzi, you dare to scheme against me? The immortal light of the great all-embracing heaven rumbled, and the winds and clouds in the world changed constantly. Yi Xian's forehead shone, and a wisp of chaotic fog twined around his body. 3,000 black strands turned blood red, and the number one killing weapon of all time, the heaven-destroying halberd, floated out from the depths of his forehead. Rumble! The world was boundless and evil aura surged to the sky. The dark and deep cold light scraped across the heaven-destroying halberd. The halberd's tip, like the light of dawn, released an unimaginable killing intent, causing the entire longevity mountain to sink into boundless darkness. Bang! 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 The inverse immortal formation diagram, the 8 gates of life and death, turned immortals into mortals and suppressed the world. When Yi Xian activated the inverse immortal formation diagram, the 8 gates of life and death rumbled and rotated in the firmament. The aura that suppressed the world was released, and an unimaginable killing intent locked onto Zhen Yuanzi. Chapter 535. The immortal body of the great all-embracing heaven glowed, and the indestructible primordial spirit buzzed. Yi Xian's essence, energy, and spirit rose to the peak. Yi Xian swung the heaven-destroying halberd and pointed it at Zhen Yuanzi. That silent murderous aura also spread out at this moment. Sage-to-be was an extremely terrifying figure. Although Yi Xian was extremely furious, he didn't dare to be careless. This also made him use his trump card. He also wanted to test the gap between himself and a sage-to-be. Looking at Yi Xian's murderous aura, Zhen Yuanzi was still smiling. However, when he saw the heaven-destroying halberd, his eyes slightly narrowed, and a hint of fear quietly flashed across his eyes. Then he became calm again. Could it be that you didn't notice that your cultivation has already stepped into the 4th heavenly layer of the great all-embracing heaven? Zhen Yuanzi said calmly. Hearing Zhen Yuanzi's words, Yi Xian was slightly startled. He quickly checked his cultivation. It wasn't until a dozen breaths later that Yi Xian slowly came back to his senses. However, the murderous aura around him also slowly dissipated at this moment. He looked at Zhen Yuanzi with an extremely complicated expression. It's extremely difficult to cultivate the immortal scripture. Only the yin and yang qi can help you break through the 4th heavenly layer of the great all-embracing heaven. If I didn't let you and the Empyrean fairy enter the yin-yang world, I'm afraid you would need at least 100,000 years to break through the 2nd heavenly layer of the great all-embracing heaven. Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan said tirelessly. Then why did you ask me to get the immortal elemental dissolving Ganoderma? Yi Xian frowned slightly. Looking at the puzzled expression on Yi Xian's face, Grand Immortal Zhen Yuan smiled mysteriously and said, The immortal elemental dissolving Ganoderma is a treasure of heaven and earth. Back then, demon ancestor Luo Ho swallowed the immortal elemental dissolving Ganoderma and cultivated his demon art to the great success stage. This allowed him to enter the sage-to-be. When you cultivate to the 9th heavenly layer of the great all-embracing heaven and prepare to pass the tribulation of the sage-to-be, this immortal elemental dissolving Ganoderma will increase your chances of success by 30%. Do you understand now? Grand immortal elemental dissolving Ganoderma. Wang. The heaven-punishing halberd returned to the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows, and the defying immortal formation diagram was stored in the Sumeru space. The tribulation transcender transformation within Yi Xian's body came to a stop. The 3,000 strands of blood-red hair turned into black threads, and the killing intent around his body slowly dissipated. Thank you for your kindness, Senior. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and cupped his hands towards Zhen Yuanzi. However, a deep look flashed across his eyes before he regained his composure. Yi Xian, I'll kill you. All of a sudden, a delicate rebuke sounded out from behind Yi Xian. The 9 heavens maiden walked out from the yin-yang world. A sharp sword of immortal light pierced through the air. The sword light that could destroy the heavens and earth was terrifying to the extreme. Clang! Yi Xian turned around, and pointed a finger at the incoming immortal sword. No matter how hard the Empyrean fairy tried, her immortal sword couldn't move an inch forward. Clang! Yi Xian exerted force with 2 fingers, breaking the immortal sword in 2. He casually threw it to the ground and looked at the Empyrean fairy with a complicated expression. Yi Xian frowned and said, "Have you had enough?" "Yi Xian, you're shameless." Her pure body had been defiled by Yi Xian, but Yi Xian still had such an attitude. This caused the Empyrean fairy to bite her lips, and tears began to flow from her eyes. Yi Xian calmly said, "Profound fairy, this emperor had no choice. Although I have taken your body, this emperor can take responsibility for you." "You're still talking?" The Empyrean fairy's eyes were red, and tears kept falling from her eyes. She used the origin immortal art and charged at Yi Xian like a madwoman. Bang bang bang. The Empyrean fairy had long ago lost her holy and aloof aura. The shame and anger in her heart made her want nothing more than to kill Yi Xian, and she began to attack Yi Xian without any rhyme or reason. Buzz! Yi Xian stepped forward, ripples appearing beneath his feet as he shot into the heavens. When he reappeared, he was high in the sky. It was clear that he didn't want to get too entangled with the Empyrean fairy. After all, he was the one who had defiled her body, and he still felt a little guilty. Yi Xian! Swish! The Empyrean fairy shot forward in a beam of light, standing in front of Yi Xian, her tear-stained face filled with shame and anger. It was clear that she wanted to fight to the death with Yi Xian. "Just what are you trying to do?" Yi Xian's brow creased in irritation. If he hadn't been doing his utmost to restrain his anger, he would have already mercilessly suppressed the Empyrean fairy. The Empyrean fairy clenched her teeth, her voice hoarse with shame and anger. "Return my innocence." "Ha!" Yi Xian suddenly chuckled, and then he gave the Empyrean fairy an extremely strange look. "How do you want me to return your innocence? Do you think that if I sleep with you once, you'll sleep with me again?" "If you're willing, I'm fine with it," Yi Xian softly said. Upon hearing Yi Xian's words, the Empyrean fairy's face was filled with shame and anger. She shouted at Yi Xian hoarsely, "You're shameless." Yi Xian helplessly sighed as he looked at the Empyrean fairy's ashamed and angry face. He said calmly, "Empyrean fairy, since things have already happened, I, Yi Xian, will not deny it. Unfortunately, I won't compensate you with my life. If you insist on fighting to the death with me, then don't blame me for being merciless." After saying this, the smile on Yi Xian's face disappeared. His voice gradually turned cold, and a cold and vicious killing intent flashed across his eyes. He looked at the Empyrean fairy with a merciless expression. Obviously, Yi Xian wasn't just saying this. If the Empyrean fairy didn't stop, then he would have no choice but to kill her. Although this method was a little too merciless, Yi Xian hated trouble. Only by killing the Empyrean fairy could he solve this problem. Looking at Yi Xian's cold face, the Empyrean fairy clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes were filled with tears. Her feelings were extremely complicated. She wanted to kill Yi Xian, but she knew that she didn't have the ability to do so. Moreover, there seemed to be a voice telling the Empyrean fairy that she actually didn't want to kill Yi Xian. It was just that she was extremely conflicted now. It wasn't her intention to let Yi Xian go. Her mind was in a mess, and she didn't know how to deal with this matter. A heaven-sent marriage. I have an idea. I wonder if the two of you would like to hear it. Grand deity Zhen Yuan quietly appeared between the two with a warm smile on his face. "Zhen Yuanzi, if you didn't invite me to Wu Zhuang Taoist Temple, I wouldn't have suffered such a disaster. It would have been better if Zhen Yuanzi didn't speak." His words immediately made the Empyrean fairy extremely angry. She looked at Zhen Yuanzi with resentment in her eyes. From the beginning to the end, although Yi Xian had sullied her virginity, the initiator of all this was Zhen Yuanzi, who added fuel to the fire. How could the Empyrean fairy not be extremely angry? "My little friend, don't be angry. As the saying goes, a perfect match is made in heaven. If Empyrean fairy is willing, I'm willing to be a matchmaker and let Yi Xian marry you. What do you think?" Zhen Yuanzi stroked his beard and smiled. As Zhen Yuanzi's words fell, the Empyrean fairy was stunned on the spot. After a full 10 breaths, she turned around and looked at Yi Xian. Her starry eyes were extremely complicated. Chapter 536. At this moment, Yi Xian frowned slightly. He could completely sense the Empyrean fairy's conflicted feelings. However, Zhen Yuanzi's suggestion also stunned him. Could it be that he really had to marry the Empyrean fairy? Yi Xian had cultivated for 7,000 years. He had walked step by step from a weak youth to his current position as the Celestial Emperor. It could be said that he had never thought of marrying and having children. Even when Mother Yi urged him to get married in the human world, he had refused. However, Zhen Yuanzi's matchmaking today was clearly not just to facilitate a marriage. Instead, it was to pull him closer to the Nuwa palace. After all, the Empyrean fairy was the Nuwa's only disciple. Just this identity alone would give Yi Xian unimaginable help. Little friend Yi, you've just ascended to the position of Celestial Emperor, but the position of Queen Mother has been vacant for a long time. I've calculated that in the 3 realms, only the Empyrean fairy is qualified to be the Queen Mother of the West. Today the two of you are a perfect match. Isn't this a marriage predestined by heaven? Zhen Yuanzi said tirelessly. What a joke. I don't care about the position of Queen Mother. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy spoke coldly. Her cold and aloof aura once again returned to her body. However, when she looked at Yi Xian, there was a hint of complexity in her eyes. Obviously, Zhen Yuanzi's suggestion was not without reason. It was also the best way to resolve this matter. As the Celestial Emperor of the 3 realms, Yi Xian was completely worthy of the Empyrean fairy. If the two of them became husband and wife, it would indeed be a match made in heaven. Yi Xian, you've sullied my chastity, but I can't kill you. If you want to marry me, then come to the Nuwa palace and personally propose marriage to the Nuwa. As long as the Nuwa agrees to this marriage, there's no harm in me marrying you. The Empyrean fairy spoke coldly. However, if one listened carefully, they would discover that her voice was trembling slightly. She turned into a streak of light and shot off into the distance. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he watched the Empyrean fairy's departing figure. A thought flashed through his eyes. However, the position of Queen Mother was nothing to Yi Xian. No matter what, he had sullied the Empyrean fairy's chastity. There was nothing wrong with marrying her. However, the problem was that the Nuwa palace was a heavenly saint. Although he had married the Empyrean fairy and pulled the Nuwa palace to his side, Yi Xian was still deeply fearful of this Saint Nuwa. Everyone below the saint level was an ant. It was impossible to fathom a saint's thoughts. This was not just a saying. Yi Xian knew himself best. Although he was the Celestial Emperor of the 3 realms, he was nothing in front of a saint. If a saint wanted to kill him, it would only take a single thought. Moreover, Yi Xian had just ascended to the position of Celestial Emperor. He had yet to control the entire 3 realms. Whether it was the Chan sect, the Western Spirit Mountain, or the most mysterious Yama underworld, these were all problems he had to face. Yi Xian had 2 major things to do now. The first was to improve his cultivation. The second was to completely control the 3 realms. These were the things that Yi Xian had to do at the moment. Marrying the Empyrean fairy was a double-edged sword. Although it seemed that he had pulled the Nuwa palace to his side, the saint's thoughts were unpredictable. This was also a ticking time bomb. Just as Yi Xian was deep in thought, Zhen Yuanzi smiled and said, "Little friend, you don't have to think too much. I was the one who added fuel to the fire. I will not stand by and do nothing. When I personally go to the Nuwa palace to propose marriage for you, it can be considered a good thing between you and the Empyrean fairy." Yi Xian was not an indecisive person. He had already made up his mind to marry the Empyrean fairy. This time, Zhen Yuanzi personally went to the Nuwa palace to propose marriage. This was exactly what Yi Xian wanted. "Senior, I'll have to trouble you." Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed. "Aha! If you become a sage to be in the future, this can be considered a good karma between us. How can you say that it's trouble?" Zhen Yuanzi smiled slightly. When he took a step forward, he also disappeared from Yi Xian's sight. Heaven and earth twisted and the void rippled. When Zhen Yuanzi left, the entire longevity mountain also disappeared. His sage-to-be methods were indeed unpredictable. This also made Yi Xian take a deep look at the disappearing longevity mountain. When he took a step forward, he returned to the 33rd Celestial Court. Outside the 33rd Celestial Court, the Nuwa Palace. Thousands of auspicious clouds and golden light sprinkled down. Immortal clouds flowed, and immortal birds danced. A vast golden palace stood tall in the clouds. There were also multicolored lights rippling in the endless clouds. 99,999 white jade stairs spread out from the Nuwa Palace. The stairs piled up with white jade emitted immortal light. The Empyrean fairy was walking up the white jade stairs step by step to the Nuwa Palace. Rumble! Heaven and earth changed and space changed. Before the Empyrean fairy could react, her eyes stung slightly. When she opened them again, she was already in the Nuwa Palace. Sigh! A soft sigh resounded within Nuwa's Dao Palace. An illusory figure sat cross-legged at the center, while a wisp of chaotic chi coiled around her. Even though she didn't emanate any imposing aura, it still caused others to feel inferior. The Nuwa Palace. The only female saint among the 6 saints of heaven and earth. In the past, she used the merit of mending the heavens and creating people to become a saint. She was a supreme existence in the 3 realms. Master! The Empyrean fairy's eyes were filled with tears. She knelt in the Nuwa Palace and kowtowed. The 7 emotions and 6 desires are difficult to overcome. Yi Xian's past is unknown. Even I can't see what his future will be like. I have always avoided any involvement with him. I shouldn't have let you go to the 5th manor. But in the end, I still let you have this ill-fated relationship with him. The Nuwa Palace sighed. Master, you already knew that I would face this tribulation? The Empyrean fairy was stunned. Bitterness flashed across her eyes. Emotions are the most difficult to understand. Yi Xian is your tribulation. Even if I didn't let you go to the 5th manor, you would still be entangled with him in the future. The Nuwa Palace sighed. Tribulation. The Empyrean fairy muttered to herself. Yi Xian's voice and face appeared in her mind. A hint of confusion flashed across her eyes. Master, this person is extremely shameless. He even insulted my virginity. I want nothing more than to kill him. How can I have feelings for him? The Empyrean fairy was extremely confused. Extreme hatred is love, and extreme love is also hate. How can you differentiate between love and hate? The Nuwa Palace's calm voice confused the Empyrean fairy. Looking at the Empyrean fairy's confused expression, the Nuwa Palace shook her head helplessly. She murmured, although Yi Xian is your tribulation, he is also your benefactor. If he really is the 7th saint destined by the heavens, you will also value your husband and reach the heavens in a single step. The heavens ordained saint? The Empyrean fairy's expression changed drastically. She looked at the Nuwa Palace in shock and fell into a daze. In the past, Dao ancestor Hong Jun once said that there were 7 saints in the world. However, endless time has passed, and only the 6 of us lie high above the 33rd heaven. The 7th saint is nowhere to be found. If I'm not wrong, Yi Xian is very likely to be the 7th saint. Otherwise, why would I let you meet him? The Nuwa Palace sighed. Chapter 537. Saint. These 2 simple words were like an ancient divine mountain that pressed down on the Empyrean fairy's heart, making her faintly breathless. It was because the word saint was too heavy. Even though the Empyrean fairy was Nuwa's disciple, she still had to be pious in front of Nuwa, and had great reverence for saints. If what Nuwa said was true, Yi Xian might be the 7th heaven-destined saint. The Empyrean fairy felt that marrying Yi Xian might be her greatest blessing. Master, if he really is the heaven-destined saint, I'm willing to marry him. The Empyrean fairy was silent for a long time. When she raised her head to look at Nuwa, her gaze became extremely firm, and there was an indescribable expression in her eyes. Alas, Nuwa's body was surrounded by the aura of chaos. She let out a sigh and said, although you 2 can become husband and wife, I've divined the fate of your marriage with him. Yi Xian walks the path of ruthlessness. If he steps into the sage-to-be, and cleaves the good corpse first, the first person he will kill will probably be you. You will also be deeply trapped in the love tribulation, and will never be reincarnated. Although Nuwa was a saint, she was kind and compassionate. After all, the Empyrean fairy was her disciple. She did not want her disciple to become Yi Xian's stepping stone. The 6 desires were ruthless, and the heaven and earth were heartless. Yi Xian walked the path of slaughter and blood. Looking at his path, all his relatives and friends were buried in the yellow earth. Only graves were left behind him. Killing one's wife to prove one's Tao. The heaven and earth were ruthless. These words were too cruel. As a saint, although Nuwa could not predict Yi Xian's future, she was very clear about his cultivation path. Right now, Yi Xian was still a great Luo golden immortal. If he stepped into the quasi-saint realm, he would be able to see the 7th saint position in the world. As for the merciless Tao that he cultivated, he would also reach large success. Killing one's wife to prove one's Tao was not impossible. Thinking of this ending, Nuwa frowned slightly and could only sigh. Master, he has already tainted my chastity. Since I can't kill him, I can only marry him. Even if he is my love tribulation, I will definitely break through it and step into the sage-to-be. The Empyrean fairy's gaze was firm, and her voice was sonorous and powerful. Since you have made up your mind, I have nothing to say. However, you are a disciple of the Nuwa Palace. If you marry him so hastily, the Nuwa Palace will be looked down upon by Yi Xian. Nuwa said softly, Master, what do you mean? The Empyrean fairy asked. Whether Yi Xian is the 7th heaven's destined saint or not is only my guess. After 100 years, I will issue a decree to recruit a worthy husband for you in the Nuwa Palace. If he is really the 7th heaven's destined saint, he will definitely be able to defeat all his enemies. Then you can marry him. Nuwa paused for a moment as the aura of chaos around her rose. She murmured, If he is not the heaven's destined saint and dies in the hands of all the powerful people, then there is no need for you to marry him. Clearly Nuwa had her own thoughts. Although she guessed that Yi Xian was the heaven's destined saint, it was only a guess. If Yi Xian could come out on top and defeat all his enemies, then it would further prove that he was the son of destiny. If Yi Xian died tragically in the Nuwa Palace, then Nuwa would be relieved of one of her worries. It could be said to be a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. A palace maid walked into the Nuwa Palace and bowed to Nuwa as she reported, Empress, Zhen Yuanzi is asking for an audience outside the palace. This disciple will take her leave first. Everything will be up to Master. The Empyrean fairy naturally knew what Zhen Yuanzi's arrival meant, so she got up and left the Nuwa Palace. Everything would be up to Saint Nuwa. Let him in. Nuwa was not surprised by Zhen Yuanzi's arrival, and her voice was very gentle. Soon, under the palace maid's lead, Zhen Yuanzi strolled into the Nuwa Palace. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand with a smile on his face. Even when facing Nuwa, he did not feel too restrained. Greetings, fellow Nuwa. Zhen Yuanzi made a Taoist bow, and his attitude was neither haughty nor humble. Zhen Yuanzi, you schemed against the Empyrean fairy to help Yi Xian break through the shackles of cultivation. Are you looking down on me? Nuwa said calmly, but the chaotic aura around her rose slightly. An unimaginable saint's might filled the entire Nuwa Palace, and it also made Zhen Yuanzi's face turn pale, and he took 3 steps back. Obviously, the saint's power was too terrifying. Although Zhen Yuanzi was known as the ancestor of earthly immortals, and was ranked among the sage-to-be, he still felt the pressure of heaven and earth when facing Nuwa, a true saint. Buzz! Immortal light lingered, and the Book of Earth appeared. The Book of Earth suppressed the mountains and rivers, and reversed the past and present. It quietly appeared in Zhen Yuanzi's hand, and it also allowed him to easily isolate the saint's power. Fellow Nuwa, why do you have to pretend to be angry? Zhen Yuanzi smiled and said, You are the heaven's will saint, and you should have already calculated that the Empyrean fairy and Yi Xian have such a good fate. I was just pushing the boat along with the current to form a good relationship with Yi Xian. Fellow Taoist, why do you have to punish me? Zhen Yuanzi, you are indeed worthy of being the ancestor of earthly immortals. Nuwa withdrew her saint's power, and looked at Zhen Yuanzi with a touch of admiration. After Pangu opened the sky, many living creatures appeared in the untainted world. Legend had it that the original body of immortal Zhen Yuan was transformed from the innate spiritual root, and he had lived longer than Nuwa. He was one of the first people since the creation of the world. Although Nuwa was a saint, She could only address Jin Yuanzi as fellow Taoist. Fellow Niwa, you should know why I am here. Since Yi Xian and the Empyrean Fairy have such a good fate, I hope you can help them. Jin Yuanzi smiled and said, in 100 years, the Niwa Palace will recruit a good son-in-law. All the talents of the 3 realms can come to the Niwa Palace. If anyone can defeat all the heroes and win, he will be able to marry the Empyrean Fairy, Niwa said calmly. Great! Jin Yuanzi cupped his hands and bowed. There was no dissatisfaction on his face. He quietly turned around and walked out of the Niwa Palace. At this moment, the Niwa Palace was silent. Only Saint Niwa was sitting cross-legged in the chaotic void. When she opened and closed her eyes, strands of chaotic golden light bloomed. She looked at Jin Yuanzi's back, and a touch of doubt flashed in her eyes. Pango opened the sky and Hongjun preached. Immortal Zhen Yuan has lived to this day, and has never competed with others. Even when he listened to Tao in the Purple Cloud Palace, he did not ask for the position of a saint. Does Jin Yuanzi really have no desires? Niwa murmured, and the chaotic golden light bloomed slightly. Although she was a saint, she was not omniscient. She had never been able to see through Jin Yuanzi's intentions. Above the 9 heavens, the clouds were thousands of miles long. Jin Yuanzi traveled on the clouds. Every step he took covered a distance of millions of miles. He did not appear between heaven and earth. His magic skills were too mysterious and terrifying. Chapter 538. Buzz. The void froze and time stood still. Jin Yuanzi paused and slowly turned around to look behind him. His voice was calm as he said, Do you think Niwa has noticed something? Buzz. A dot of chaotic light appeared in the void. The green-robed Taoist was covered in immortal light, as he quietly appeared beside Jin Yuanzi. Among the 6 great sages, Niwa is the weakest. You and I have lived much longer than her. Even if she has doubts, we can only take one step at a time. The one we should be most careful of is Lao Tzu Li Er. He is the most difficult person to deal with in the 3 realms, the green-robed Taoist said calmly. Hongjun has transformed into the Tao, and the sages lie high in the 9 heavens. We pre-sages have our own plans. Let's see who will be the final victor, Jin Yuanzi murmured with a smile. However, when his eyes changed, the world froze. A piece of news that shocked the 3 realms came from Niwa Palace. It shocked the heaven, earth, and man realms. The sage's decree fell upon the 3 realms. Whether it was the celestial court, the earth immortal realm, or even the Hades, they were all shocked by the sage's decree. The meaning of Niwa's decree was clear. 100 years later, Niwa Palace would recruit a husband for the fairy of the 9 heavens. Regardless of immortal, demon, or devil, anyone who could stand out in this event would be called the Empyrean Fairy's husband. When this news spread throughout the 3 realms, it caused an uproar. This was because Niwa Palace had never recruited a husband since its establishment. After all, Niwa Palace was a sage's place. Everyone below the sage was insignificant. Her disciples and palace mates had no need to marry others. Although the people of the 3 realms did not understand why Saint Niwa had issued such a decree, this news still caused a commotion in the 3 realms, causing some of the Tongtian experts to be eager to give it a try. Not to mention that the Empyrean Fairy was the only disciple of Niwa. And not to mention that the Empyrean Fairy was backed by the sage, who was a towering tree. Just the fact that the Empyrean Fairy was beautiful, and was a beauty of the 3 realms, who was on par with the fairy of Guanghan, was enough to make all the Tongtian mighty figures scramble for her. Everyone loved beauty, but not everyone was as indifferent to women as Yi Xian. The Empyrean Fairy's admirers were not as numerous as the carps crossing the river, but they were definitely not in the minority. Marrying the Empyrean Fairy as his wife was a wonderful thing that made some of the Tongtian experts smile when they were in the midst of cultivation. Niwa Palace's son-in-law selection was a grand event that had never happened before. The 3 realms of heaven, earth, and man were completely stirred. Countless Tongtian experts came into being, preparing to head to Niwa Palace to participate in this grand event 100 years later. Yama Underworld. The Ghost Emperor came out, the Tongtian Great Demon King came out of nowhere, and even the ancient experts came out of the Blessed Enclave. The most terrifying thing was that it was suspected that a sage-to-be had made a shocking statement, that he was determined to get the Empyrean Fairy. The three realms were in an uproar, and there was a lot of discussion. A mere decree from the sage had already caused a sage-to-be to come into being. This was simply unimaginable. The 33rd Celestial Court. There were thousands of auspicious clouds, immortal islands, and celestial light sprinkling down from the sky. Cranes were roaming in the clouds, and many immortals were shuttling back and forth. Celestial soldiers and generals patrolled the sky from time to time. Bullfighting Palace, Lingxiao Hall. Yi Xian sat high on the Celestial Emperor's throne, and the immortals of the Celestial Court stood on both sides of him. A heavy and oppressive atmosphere spread throughout the Lingxiao Hall. The sage's decree was known throughout the heaven and earth, so it was impossible for the immortals of the Celestial Court to not know about it. However, when Yi Xian announced that he would head to Nuwa Palace to marry the Empyrean Fairy in 100 years, all the immortals felt extremely heavy. It should be known that the Nuwa Palace's son-in-law selection was no small matter. How could the people who could participate in this grand event be ordinary? It was even rumored that a sage-to-be had appeared and announced that he would marry the Empyrean Fairy. Although Yi Xian was the celestial emperor of the three realms, and had the support of the Tongtian, he could only return in defeat in the face of all the peak Zenith Heaven Realm experts, and the terrifying sage-to-be. He had embarrassed Yi Tiandi. However, none of the immortals of the Celestial Court dared to advise him, because everyone knew that Yi Xian's character was extremely overbearing. If anyone dared to refute Yi Xian, it would be an act of seeking death. Celestial Emperor, this grand event will last for 100 years. I'm willing to go to Aquamarine Palace to borrow the 4 immortal slaying swords. When you go there with the 4 immortal slaying swords, even the sage-to-be will have to retreat. Shen Gongbao frowned, but still stepped out of the crowd. Because Yi Xian's fate was connected to the Jie sect, if he went to Nuwa Palace and suffered a great defeat, it would also affect the rise of the Jie sect. The Celestial Court had just been established, the Chan sect had not been destroyed, the Western Holy Mountain was beside it, and the underworld had not been controlled. These were all things that Yi Xian needed to do. However, now that Yi Xian wanted to marry the Empyrean Fairy, this was an extremely tricky matter. But Shen Gongbao also understood that the Celestial Court still lacked a Queen Mother, and only the Empyrean Fairy was worthy of the position. In this grand event of Nuwa Palace, the third watershed of Daluo was definitely not a small number, and it was said that there was a Taoist field of sage-to-be. Although Yi Xian was the Celestial Emperor, and his combat power was even more heaven-defying, it was still very dangerous for him to go against these people. As a disciple of the Jie sect, Shen Gongbao was even conferred as Yi Xian's guardian by Tongtian. He had the obligation to ensure Yi Xian's safety. If Yi Xian really wanted to go to Nuwa Palace, only the 4 immortal slaying swords could let him kill everyone. The 4 immortal slaying swords were the #1 killing weapon under the heavenly way. This was not just a saying, it had the monstrous power to destroy gods and ghosts. In the past, Tongtian set up the immortal slaying sword formation to fight against the 4 sages alone. Although he was defeated and left Aquamarine Palace, from this, one could see how terrifying the 4 immortal slaying swords were. If Yi Xian had the 4 immortal slaying swords in hand, he would be invincible even without setting up the sword formation. Shen Gongbao is right. If the Celestial Emperor really wants to go to Nuwa Palace 100 years later, you must have the 4 immortal slaying swords in hand. Otherwise, we will not allow you to participate in this grand event. The Golden Spirit Shimu bowed to Yi Xian and said. As the two spoke, the 24 heavenly inspectors, the 28 mansions of the heavenly cycle, the 36 stars of the heavenly spirit, the 72 stars of the earthly fiend, and even the immortals of the celestial court echoed. You don't have to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind. Yi Xian spoke from the throne of the celestial emperor, and the entire Lingxiao hall fell silent. Thump, thump, thump. Yi Xian's fingers tapped on the imperial table, producing rhythmic sounds. His expression was calm, and the immortals of the celestial court did not know what Yi Xian was thinking. In fact, no one knew that Yi Xian had his own thoughts. He also knew that Shen Gongbao and the rest were not going against him, but were sincerely thinking for him. The 4 immortal slaying swords were the #1 killing weapon under the heavenly Tao, and it was also Tongtian's spiritual treasure. Yi Xian naturally knew that if he borrowed the 4 immortal slaying swords, he would be able to marry the Empyrean fairy smoothly. However, Yi Xian could not afford to repay this favor. When sages borrow treasures, karma engenders each other. There was no love without reason in this world, and there was no hatred without reason. If Yi Xian really borrowed the 4 immortal slaying swords, then he would owe Tongtian a huge favor. Chapter 539. Perhaps nothing could be seen now, because Yi Xian's cultivation was too weak in the eyes of the sages. However, if he ascended to the sage realm in the future, he would have to repay the favor he owed in the past. Forming a karma with the sages was a great terror between life and death. If he made a mistake, he would be punished by the sages. This was also why Yi Xian never went to the Aquamarine Palace to see the Tongtian after ascending to the position of Celestial Emperor. He was afraid that the Tongtian would help him too much. When he reached the peak, he would have to repay the favor to the Tongtian. Therefore, the 4 immortal slaying swords could not be lent. Of course, Yi Xian wanted to marry the Empyrean fairy, not because he fell in love with her, but because the celestial court still lacked a queen mother. Only the Empyrean fairy was worthy of the title of queen mother. The most important thing was that Yi Xian discovered something that made him happy in the yin-yang world. When he was in perfect harmony with the Empyrean fairy, his cultivation increased tremendously. This might be the effect of the yin-yang dual cultivation. Otherwise, how could he break through to the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Luo? Moreover, the Empyrean fairy was backed by the Nuwa Palace. If she could become the queen mother, it would be of great benefit to Yi Xian. From the beginning to the end, Yi Xian only treated the Empyrean fairy as a tool. There was no so-called love at all. Moreover, the Empyrean fairy was already his woman. Although Yi Xian did not like this woman, how could he tolerate others tainting the woman he had slept with? Although Yi Xian walked the path of ruthlessness, he was still a man. How could he allow others to taint the woman he had slept with? Yi Xian absolutely could not accept such an insult. Therefore, he had to go to the Nuwa Palace 100 years later. Otherwise, wouldn't it be the greatest insult to him if someone else were to marry the Empyrean fairy? Moreover, Yi Xian was not stupid. He completely understood what Nuwa meant. This was a test for him. If he could not defeat all the great enemies, how could he have the qualifications to peek into the saint realm? Thud thud thud. While Yi Xian was thinking, the sound of footsteps came from outside the Lingxiao Hall. Before Venus Taibai arrived, her excited voice sounded in the Lingxiao Hall. Reporting to the Celestial Emperor, Neza and his son have been captured by the Taoist of Wangchuan and brought back to the Celestial Court. The 100,000 celestial soldiers under his command have also surrendered. They are currently waiting outside the southern heavenly gate for the Celestial Emperor's judgment. As Venus Taibai's words fell, Yi Xian snapped out of his thoughts. He could only temporarily suppress the matter of the Empyrean fairy. Betraying the Celestial Court and leaving behind a letter, Neza and his son should pay a visit to the Immortal slaying platform. The goddess of stone said hatefully. Clearly, she could not wait for the people of the Chan sect to die. Yi Xian stood up from the throne and walked out of the Lingxiao Hall. This also caused the immortals of the Celestial Court to quickly follow. In front of the southern heavenly gate, the Taoist of Wangchuan wore a yellow Taoist robe and held a horsetail whisk. The Daluo immortal light around him rippled slightly. He was originally a Daluo disbanded immortal in the Earth immortal realm. His cultivation was at the 4th heavenly layer of Daluo. Ever since he joined Yi Xian, he was conferred the title of Inspector Heavenly Ambassador by Yi Xian. When Neza and his son led the 100,000 celestial soldiers and celestial generals to leave the Celestial Court, the Taoist of Wangchuan personally requested to capture them. With his cultivation at the 2nd heavenly layer of Daluo, it was easy to capture Neza and his son. Rumble! The heavens shook and the void hummed. When Yi Xian and the immortals of the Celestial Court arrived on a cloud, the Taoist of Wangchuan quickly stepped forward to welcome them. He first bowed to Yi Xian and said, Greetings, Celestial Emperor. No need for formalities. As Yi Xian spoke, he raised his eyes to look ahead. He saw Neza and his son being bound by the immortal binding rope. At this moment, they were standing in front of the southern heaven gate, looking at Yi Xian with extremely complicated expressions. How dare you? Why aren't you kneeling when you see the Celestial Emperor? Venus Taibai angrily rebuked Neza and his son. Humph. Neza snorted coldly. Venus Taibai, you're truly shameless. If you hadn't betrayed the Jade Emperor, you would have died at Yi Xian's hands long ago, wouldn't you? You. Venus Taibai's face flushed red when Neza exposed his shameful past. He was so embarrassed that he couldn't speak, but his gaze towards Neza and his son was filled with an extremely sinister murderous intent. When he betrayed the Jade Emperor, everyone in the three realms scolded him for being a traitor. This was his greatest humiliation. After 1,000 years, this voice had only just been suppressed. But now, Neza had exposed his shameful past in front of the immortals of the Celestial Court. How could he not hate Neza and his son to the core? Celestial Emperor, Neza and his son betrayed the Celestial Court. It's only right for us to go to the immortal execution stage and make sure they never reincarnate. Otherwise, if others imitate them, the Celestial Court will lose all face. Venus Taibai was furious. He bowed to Yi Xian, his words filled with murderous intent. How should I deal with the two of them? Don't tell me that I have to listen to your orders? Yi Xian calmly spoke, but his gaze towards Taibai Jinxing revealed a trace of malice. Hiss. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Taibai Jinxing instantly woke up and sucked in a breath of cold air. Fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead as he hurriedly retreated behind Yi Xian. He knew that his words had caused Yi Xian to feel dissatisfied. Thump, thump, thump. Yi Xian walked slowly, but with every step he took, Yi Xian and his son's expressions changed drastically. There was a hint of despair in their eyes. This was because the father and son knew that once they were captured and brought back to the Celestial Court, Yi Xian would never let them go. Yi Xian, if you want to kill us, just kill us. There's no need to put on an act and show your majesty as the Celestial Emperor. However, I want to tell you that if you want to exterminate the Chan school and provoke a saint to appear, you will be doomed eternally, Neza said angrily. There was no fear on his face. Yi Xian, as the saying goes, one should spare people wherever possible. You are now the Celestial Emperor of the three realms. We are just ants in your eyes. If you let us go, we will definitely not be your enemy in the future, Li Jing said with a trembling voice. Li Jing trembled as he spoke. He hoped that Yi Xian wouldn't go too far. Be my enemy? Hearing the father and son's words, Yi Xian smiled. However, Yi Xian's smile was very contemptuous and contained a deep sense of disdain. Do you and your son think that you are worthy of being my enemy? Yi Xian walked in front of the two of them and looked at them with an extremely indifferent gaze. It was as if he was looking at pigs and sheep being slaughtered. Father, there's no need to plead with this bastard. If we fall into his hands today, we will definitely die. Even if we die, we have to die with dignity. Neza rebuked angrily. Clearly, he knew better than Li Jing that Yi Xian was a ferocious person. He would not let them off at all. Great God of the three seas! Yi Xian smiled and looked at Neza with admiration. I'm actually not bloodthirsty. I admire people like you who are not afraid of death. Li Jing, actually, I can give you a chance. As long as you kill Neza with your own hands, I can let bygones be bygones. You will still be the Pagoda Heavenly King. What do you think of this suggestion? It was like the whisper of a demon and the temptation of a devil. Yi Xian kept smiling. However, when Li Jing and his son saw his smile, their bodies involuntarily trembled. Killing people and killing each other. This method was too vicious and cruel. It was also something that Yi Xian had always liked to do. This was because only in this kind of life and death situation could he see human nature. However, he did not know if Li Jing would personally kill Neza on the spot for his own life. Chapter 540. At the beginning of the world, all living beings had spirits. However, all living beings sought luck and avoided calamity. Even immortals were no exception. The pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li Jing was the commander of Qintang Pass, before the Great God Conferment War. At that time, he was still a cultivator, and could not even be considered an immortal. When the dust of the Great God Conferment War settled, he entered the celestial court, and became a great immortal. However, Li Jing seemed to be brave and righteous, but he was actually extremely afraid of death. It could be seen from something that had happened during the Great God Conferment War in the past. In the past, Neza had caused trouble in the sea, and pulled out the dragon's tendons and skin. It had angered the Dragon King of the East Ocean. He had gathered 1,000,000 members of the Sea Clan to go to Chintang Pass to denounce him. In order to prevent himself from being implicated, Li Jing had personally handed Neza over, and allowed the Dragon King of the East Ocean to deal with him. It was also that year that the relationship between father and son was severed. Neza cut his bones to return to his father, and flesh to return to his mother. He died tragically in front of Chintang Pass. If not for Neza's master perfected Tai, who had regathered his body, Neza would have died before the Great God Conferment War. When the Great God Conferment War began, Neza followed his master's orders, and went down the mountain. He had made many contributions in the Great God Conferment War. It was also because of his master's mediation, and the matchmaking of many disciples of Chan's school, that the father and son reconciled. After the Great God Conferment tribulation, the father and son became important ministers of the celestial court. However, what happened back then had always been a barrier between the father and son. The two of them could be said to be harmonious on the surface. Now the celestial court had changed. The Jade Emperor and Queen Mother had already died. The immortals of Chan's school had retreated. Yi Tiandi had just ascended to the position of Heavenly Emperor, and the situation was already set. Li Jing knew that he had no one to rely on. As the saying goes, even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. If Li Jing killed Neza personally in order to survive, even if he could survive today, he would probably face the torrential anger of Chan's school in the future. However, Li Jing also knew that if he did not kill Neza, he would definitely die today. There was no hope of survival. The choice of life and death was right in front of him. It was a huge problem. Li Jing did not know how to choose. Suddenly, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a cold smile. He walked in front of the father and son and said in a calm voice, "Li Jing, don't say that I didn't give you a chance. It's you who didn't know how to cherish it. Neza, I'll give you a chance now. As long as you kill Li Jing, you'll still be the great god of the 3 seas. I can even help you enter the Zenith Heaven realm quickly. What do you think?" Yi Xian said calmly. "Yi Xian, if you want to kill me, go ahead. There's no need to drive a wedge between us." Neza had a resolute personality, and was not afraid of death at all. He was even more dismissive of Yi Xian's words. He looked at Yi Xian with eyes full of anger and resentment. If not for his low cultivation, he would have killed Yi Xian long ago. Haha. Yi Xian laughed out loud and said, "I admire people who are not afraid of death. You Neza are one of them. However, people like you who aren't afraid of death don't end well." Yi Xian's smile disappeared when he said that. His expression turned cold and ruthless. He pointed his finger with immortal light, and directly removed the immortal binding rope on the father and son. Whether you kill your father or your son, this will be decided by the two of you. However, you must understand that only one of you can live in front of the southern heavenly gate. Yi Xian said and slowly retreated. However, there was a strange look in his eyes when he looked at the father and son. At this moment, Li Jing and Neza were no longer restrained. The immortal power in their bodies could already be used. However, facing Yi Xian and the other immortals of the celestial court, the father and son had solemn expressions. They knew that the two of them could not break out of the encirclement. "Father, kill me." Neza was very fearless, and was not afraid of death. He looked at Li Jing with a determined gaze. "Child, how can I kill you? As the saying goes, even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs." Li Jing's tiger eyes were filled with tears. When he clenched his fists tightly, his veins were exposed. He gritted his teeth so hard that they creaked. "Heavenly Emperor, I've brought them." Suddenly a cold voice sounded. The evil immortal of forgetfulness flew over. However, there were 2 young men in front of him, who were restrained by the immortal binding rope. "Jinja, Muza, When these two youths appeared in Li Jing's eyes, the expressions of Li Jing and Neza instantly changed. They abruptly looked at Yi Xian with eyes that were as red as blood. "Father, third brother," Jinjia and Muza said with trembling voices. However, the immortal binding rope restrained the two of them. They could not move at all. The so-called benevolence, righteousness, and morality are just a kind of fig leaf to me. Today your family is reunited. You should thank me. Yi Xian smiled. He looked back at the evil immortal of forgetfulness and said with a dark voice, "Kill them." "Yes, Heavenly Emperor." The evil immortal of forgetfulness smiled sinisterly and bowed to Yi Xian. "No." Neza roared. The fire-tipped spear suddenly appeared in his hand. His cultivation as an overarching Heaven Xian immortal erupted as he charged at the evil immortal of forgetfulness, hoping to save Jinjia and Muza. The evil immortal of forgetfulness smiled disdainfully as Neza's rage attacked. He was an ancient great ability user, and a powerhouse of both evil and demonic sections. He was at the second watershed of the grand heavenly immortal realm. How could a mere Neza be his opponent? Bang! A beam of bloody light shot out from the evil immortal of forgetfulness's hand and sent Neza flying. A cruel smile appeared on the evil immortal of forgetfulness's lips as a pair of terrifying bloody claws viciously clawed at Jinjia and Muza. "No, father, save me." Jinjia and Muza trembled and cried for help in the face of death. However, the two of them could not even resist the evil immortal of forgetfulness. Bang! Bang! The void exploded as a bloody mist appeared. Li Jing and Neza stared blankly as Jinjia and Muza were killed by the evil immortal of forgetfulness's claw. Even their primordial spirits were annihilated by the evil immortal of forgetfulness's evil arts. Their souls were scattered, and they did not even have the chance to reincarnate. This was the fate of Jinjia and Muza. "Yi Xian, I'll kill you," Neza roared with hatred. The heaven and earth ring rolled out with the chaotic sky sash, turning into two streaks of light that shot towards Yi Xian. However, there was no need for Yi Xian to do anything against Neza's weak attack. Shen Gongbao pointed out with his finger and sent Neza flying. His body was covered in blood as he suffered a severe injury. Bang! Neza's body crumbled as blood flowed out of his mouth. He crashed heavily onto the ground. No one knew if he was dead or alive. "Yi Tiandi, kill us if you want. There's no need to torture us like this," Li Jing said hatefully as his body trembled uncontrollably. "Li Jing, you're too sanctimonious and too afraid of death. Why do you have to pretend to be so righteous?" Yi Xian said as he walked towards Li Jing. When he came to Li Jing's side, he patted his shoulder affectionately and said in a low voice, "You're just afraid that after killing Neza, you won't be able to explain to the Chan sect, and will be cursed by all living beings in the three realms. From then on, there will be no place for you in the three realms." Chapter 541. I can promise you that as long as you kill Neza, today's matter will definitely not spread. I will only announce to the outside world that Neza betrayed the celestial court and was personally killed by me. What do you think? Yi Xian whispered. His voice was like the language of the devil, causing Li Jing's expression to change. He took a deep look at Yi Xian and said, "Yi Tiandi, I Li Jing, am not a 3-year-old child. Today, the immortals of the celestial court are beside me, and the 100,000 surrendered soldiers behind me are watching. If I really kill Neza with my own hands, I'm afraid there will be no place for me in the three realms." As Li Jing's words fell, Yi Xian's eyes flashed with contempt. However, his voice was gentle as he said, "So you're afraid of too many people. Actually, this matter is very easy to handle. Just kill all 100,000 surrendered soldiers." Rumble. Suddenly, Yi Xian's smile disappeared. The immortal light of the great all-embracing heaven rippled out. A destructive aura shot out, instantly turning the 100,000 heavenly soldiers behind Li Jing into dust. The bloody mist that filled the sky floated down, causing the world to become deathly silent. "Celestial Emperor, you?" Such a scene caused the expressions of the golden spirit goddess, Shen Gongbao, and the others to change drastically. They never thought that Yi Xian would actually kill 100,000 surrendered soldiers with a raise of his hand. Since these 100,000 heavenly soldiers dared to betray the celestial court with Li Jing and his son, then there's no need to keep them alive. Yi Xian said ruthlessly, as if he had done a very casual thing. He did not want to keep the lives of the 100,000 surrendered soldiers at all. In Yi Xian's rules, anyone who betrayed him would only end up dead. There had never been an exception to this. Li Jing, I am in charge of the 33rd Celestial Court. No one dares to go against my will. Today you kill Neza. From now on, you will still be the pagoda-bearing heavenly king of the Celestial Court. Today's matter will definitely not spread. I'll only give you 10 breaths time. If you don't make a decision by then, you can just die here. Yi Xian smiled and slowly walked away from Li Jing. This also caused Li Jing to suddenly come to his senses. He looked at Yi Xian with an extremely furious gaze. Yi Xian, kill me if you want. Even if I, Li Jing, die here today, I will not compromise with you. Li Jing was filled with righteousness as he roared at Yi Xian. He quickly walked in front of Neza and helped his blood-soaked body up. Father, Neza said weakly. His eyes were filled with gratitude because Li Jing did not disappoint him. No matter how tense the relationship between father and son was back then, they were still connected by blood. How could they kill each other? My child. A line of clear tears flowed out of Li Jing's eyes. He held Neza's face with both hands, and his body trembled unconsciously. Father, I misunderstood you back then you. Poof. All of a sudden, Neza's words came to an abrupt halt. His face turned pale and lifeless as he stared blankly at his benevolent father. However, there was a bright knife in his heart that was constantly stirring his heart. Neza, don't hate me. I don't want to do this either. But if I don't kill you, I will still die. It's better to die alone than to die together, right? Child, don't you think so? Li Jing muttered to himself. His kind face gradually disappeared. His face was ferocious and twisted. He held a sharp dagger and ruthlessly stirred Neza's heart. A large amount of blood also dyed Neza's chest red. Such a scene caused the immortals of the heavenly court to fall silent. They looked at Li Jing in a daze. No one had expected that Li Jing, who had just generously sacrificed himself without fear of death, would actually do such a cruel thing. Why? Neza's face was as pale as paper. Tears blurred his eyes. He never thought that Li Jing would be so heartless. In the face of Yi Xian's death, he actually attacked him cruelly. Why? The reason is very simple. It's because I can only live if you, my unfilial son, die. Puffed. Li Jing roared ferociously. He ruthlessly pulled out the dagger that was stabbed into Neza's heart. The miserable blood stained Li Jing's face, making him look ferocious and terrifying. Poof. The dagger pierced through Neza's heart ruthlessly. Li Jing seemed to have fallen into madness. He had just pulled out the dagger in his hand when he ruthlessly stabbed it into Neza's heart again. There was no trace of father-son love left. Neza, don't blame me. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. If you didn't encourage me to betray the Celestial Court, I wouldn't have suffered such a great calamity today. The blade was merciless. A tiger eats its own child. Li Jing completely went crazy. The immortal power around him poured into the dagger, and had already pierced dozens of big holes in Neza's body. It also made Neza's body tremble slightly. His pupils kept expanding, as if his life was coming to an end at this moment. Bang! Li Jing suddenly stood up and kicked Neza's broken body away. Then, he quickly walked toward Yi Xian. Without any hesitation, he directly knelt down at Yi Xian's feet. Yi Tiandi, this unfilial son has been killed by the old minister himself. Celestial Emperor, please forgive the old minister's crime of betraying the Celestial Court. Li Jing knelt down and kowtowed. His posture was extremely humble. Haha. Yi Xian smiled. He really smiled, but his smile was very strange and heartless. This was because when he looked at Li Jing, it was as if he was looking at his father when he was young. For the sake of his own selfish desires, he could even do something like a tiger eating its own child. Li Jing, I was right about you. You really are a wolf with wild ambitions. Unfortunately, you still have to die. As Yi Xian's words entered his ears, Li Jing's expression changed drastically. He suddenly looked up at Yi Xian. What he saw was Yi Xian's heartless eyes and indifferent expression. Puff! The fire-tipped spear pierced through Li Jing's heart. The blood-colored spear was slowly pulled out. A large amount of blood spurted out from Li Jing's heart. This also made him look back blankly. Neza was bathed in blood. Dozens of bloody holes appeared all over his body. He looked at Li Jing viciously and ruthlessly. The fire-tipped spear in his hand was ruthlessly stirring Li Jing's heart. A cruel and ferocious smile appeared at the corner of Neza's mouth. No. Impossible. How are you still alive? Blood kept flowing out of Li Jing's mouth. Blood spurted out from his heart. He stared at Neza with horror in his eyes. Li Jing, although I admire your despicable and ruthless methods, you are too stupid. Have you forgotten that Neza's body is made of lotus roots? His cultivation is all in the primordial spirit. As long as his primordial spirit is not destroyed, no matter how badly injured his body is, it can quickly heal. Yi Xian lightly smiled. It was also at this moment that Neza's broken body was rapidly healing. How could there be any wounds on his body? Don't kill me. Don't kill me. Li Jing was slowly retreating. However, his heart was crushed. The vitality around him kept dissipating. He looked at Neza with extreme fear in his eyes. Chapter 542. Die! Neza roared. The fire-tipped spear shone brightly, and a wisp of heavenly fire burned on the tip of the spear. With Neza's extreme hatred, the spear pierced through Li Jing's forehead and nailed him to the southern heavenly gate. Bang! Li Jing's body exploded, and his primordial spirit was annihilated. Even his primordial spirit was not left behind, and he died tragically under Neza's spear. Neza stared blankly at Li Jing's tragic death in his hands, and tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. When a person's heart died, this was the greatest sorrow. At this moment, Neza was like this. He had personally ended Li Jing's life. Whether Li Jing wanted to kill him or not, the crime of patricide was already placed on his head. Even if he could leave the celestial court alive today, the Chanism would never accept him. I am a man of my word. Since Li Jing is dead, I will let you live. You may leave now, Yi Xian said calmly, and turned to walk towards the bullfighting palace. This also caused the immortals of the celestial court to quickly follow. Yi Xian, I, Neza, swear that I will not be human if I don't kill you. Looking at Yi Xian's departing figure, Neza's eyes were filled with tears as he roared. He powerlessly knelt in front of the southern heaven gate. His eyes were already as red as blood, and a weak demonic light rippled out from his body. There was actually a trace of demonization. In the bullfighting palace of the 33rd Celestial Court, Yi Xian sat cross-legged, and Shen Gongbao stood beside him. However, he looked at Yi Xian with a slightly puzzled expression. Do you want to ask why I let Neza live? And why it is not better to kill the father and son? Yi Xian said calmly. I dare not. I believe that the Celestial Emperor has his own thoughts and decisions. I dare not speculate. Shen Gongbao bowed and said. Yi Xian stood up from the void, and looked up at the luminous star with his hands behind his back. When he opened and closed his eyes, a wisp of vicissitudes of life flashed across his eyes, and his voice became a little hoarse at this moment. Although Neza is a third-generation disciple of the Chanism, his previous life was the reincarnation of Ling Juzi, and he was also a boy under Nuwa. He has a great relationship with the Saint Nuwa. If I really kill him, this will undoubtedly make Nuwa dissatisfied with Nuwa. As Yi Xian spoke to hear, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile as he turned around to look at Shen Gongbao. He continued, furthermore, Neza killed his father. The Chan school will definitely kick him out of the sect, and there will be no place for him in the three realms. Only Nuwa's palace will be his last place. I really want to know if Nuwa will accept this person who killed his father. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Shen Gongbao's expression changed slightly, and a touch of horror flashed across his eyes. He had never thought that Yi Xian was so shrewd. He was obviously plotting against Nuwa. What on earth did Yi Xian want to do? Of course, Shen Gongbao knew what to ask and what not to ask. As for Yi Xian's purpose, only he knew. Your Majesty, if you want to marry the Empyrean fairy 100 years later, you need the 4 immortal slaying swords. If a sage-to-be is your enemy, I'm afraid I don't have the 4 immortal slaying swords. You, Shen Gongbao said hesitantly. There's no need to mention this again. I have my own decision. You can leave now. Yi Xian said calmly. Looking at Yi Xian's calm face, Shen Gongbao frowned slightly. He did not know what trump card Yi Xian had, but he could only bow and take his leave. Following Shen Gongbao's departure, Yi Xian stood alone in the bullfighting palace. The radiance of the stars that filled the sky sprinkled down, illuminating him in a mysterious and leisurely manner. However, when his eyes opened and closed, a trace of seriousness flashed through them. Sage to be. What a difficult problem. Yi Xian strolled in the bullfighting palace. A wisp of mist surrounded him, and the surrounding time and space became chaotic. Sage to be. These two simple words gave Yi Xian a pressure as heavy as the heavens and earth. Since he became the celestial emperor, the only sage to be he had seen was the grand immortal Zhen Yuan. However, the grand immortal Zhen Yuan gave him an extremely mysterious feeling, which made his heart feel extremely heavy. Of course, there were different levels of sage to be. The grand immortal Zhen Yuan could live since the beginning of the world until now. Even among the sage to be, he was not an ordinary person. However, there was a saying that one could see the whole leopard from a single spot. Anyone who could enter the sage to be level was not the overlord of the world. Yi Xian measured his own combat strength. He was now in the fourth heaven of Zenith Heaven. After using the Tribulation Transcender transformation, he should be at the peak of Zenith Heaven, which was the same level as Duobao Rulai. However, at his level, the effect of the inverse immortal formation was getting weaker and weaker. It could only cause some trouble for someone at the peak of Zenith Heaven, but it could not cause any substantial damage. Fighting a sage to be with the cultivation of a peak Zenith Heaven was simply a hopeless situation. There was no chance of winning at all. Yi Xian's intuition was very accurate. If his cultivation could enter the third watershed of Zenith Heaven, he could definitely fight a sage to be, after using the Tribulation Transcender transformation. This was also the heaven-defying aspect of the Tribulation Transcender transformation. However, he had just stepped into the fourth heaven of Zenith Heaven. It was simply a fantasy to step into the third watershed of Zenith Heaven within 100 years. Time. Yi Xian lacked time. In the bullfighting palace, Yi Xian sat cross-legged and pondered. The starlight sprinkled down from the sky, making him look mysterious and profound. Buzz! The void swayed and ripples spread. Yi Xian's glabella shone, and a 3-inch halberd rippled out until it turned into a 3-foot-long halberd that lay across Yi Xian's knees. Heaven-punishing halberd. It was known as the #1 killing weapon of all time. Legend had it that there was a huge secret hidden within the heaven-destroying halberd. Whoever could uncover this secret might become a sage to be. Of course, this legend was just nonsense. Yi Xian did not believe it at all, because the power contained within the heaven-destroying halberd did not belong to the three realms. The so-called sage to be had nothing to do with the heaven-destroying halberd and the immortal scripture. Yi Xian was very sure that whether it was the heaven-destroying halberd or the immortal scripture, these two items were not from the three realms. They were suspected to be mysterious items from the chaos. Since Yi Xian was young, the heaven-destroying halberd had recognized him as its master. However, he could not use the power contained within. Even today, he was Daluo Jingxian, and he could only use the killing power within the heaven-destroying halberd. Back then, the Jade Emperor was connected to the Celestial Court, and could be said to have an immortal body. However, when faced with the killing power of the heaven-destroying halberd, he was nailed to the southern heavenly gate by Yi Xian, and this allowed him to ascend to the position of Celestial Emperor. Yi Xian knew his own family's matters. Right now, it was impossible for his cultivation to increase rapidly. 100 years later, he would have to go to Nuwa's palace and face all sorts of great enemies. Only this mysterious heaven-punishing halberd would be able to help him. Yi Xian calmly felt it, and he became one with the halberd. His body glowed. His light seemed to be the Daluo immortal light, but it was surrounded by a killing light. This killing light came from the heaven-destroying halberd, and it made people feel like their souls were being torn apart. Whoosh! The killing light was swallowed, and there was a chaotic aura lingering. Yi Xian calmed himself down, and calmed his heart to become one with the heaven-destroying halberd. He wanted to understand some of the secrets of the heaven-destroying halberd. Wang! Suddenly, The summer space opened by itself, and the bronze immortal scripture rippled out. The dozens of pages of stone scripture flipped quickly, and lines of obscure scripture spread out from the bronze immortal scripture. Chapter 543. Qi. Countless mysterious runes were engraved around Yi Xian's body. The heaven-destroying halberd buzzed and vibrated. Chants of sutras could be heard from all directions. It was as if the souls of the dead were singing, as if a lament was being played. Yi Xian frowned as he carefully listened to this mysterious voice. However, when the chanting entered his ears, the indestructible primordial spirit in his sea of consciousness buzzed, and traces of cracks actually appeared. Freeze! Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He quickly formed a seal with both hands, and instantly stabilized the indestructible primordial spirit in his sea of consciousness. However, his forehead was drenched in cold sweat. He quickly sealed off his six senses, in an attempt to prevent the chanting from entering his ears. What a pity! The chanting of the sutras was too terrifying. Even though Yi Xian had sealed his six senses, the chanting continued to pour into his ears, causing his sea of knowledge to tremble violently. His indestructible primordial spirit showed signs of cracking again. Damn it! Yi Xian roared in his heart. He didn't expect that just channeling the power of the heaven-punishing halberd would involve the bronze immortal sutra. When the auras of these two items were connected, it would cause such a terrifying change. Ugh! A muffled groan came out of Yi Xian's mouth. Extreme pain assaulted his indestructible primordial spirit, causing his face to distort to the extreme. It was as if he was suffering from an unimaginable torture. You've crossed the river of time, shattered the heavens and the earth. Gods and demons are crying. All living beings are mourning. We're waiting for your return. Time seemed to come to a standstill, and space seemed to be frozen. An ancient voice rang out in Yi Xian's sea of consciousness. The voice seemed to transcend the barriers of space and time, vividly appearing in Yi Xian's ears. It gave off an extremely sorrowful feeling. Who are you? Who are you? Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. His entire body was drenched in sweat, and he tried his best to find the source of the voice. However, the entire bullfighting palace was engulfed in endless fog, and only the voice echoed in Yi Xian's ears. Ah! A shrill cry of pain came from Yi Xian's mouth. His glabella glowed, and the blood moon mark appeared on his forehead. It was emitting a mysterious light, causing the heaven-destroying halberd and the bronze immortal scripture to release a mysterious power that had never been seen before. Bang! Like the collapse of the heavenly Tao and the shattering of the heavens, Yi Xian's indestructible soul in his sea of consciousness suddenly collapsed, and he instantly fell into a muddle-headed state. Not a single trace of aura leaked out from his body, and it was as if he had transformed into a corpse. Thump, thump, thump. His heart was beating vigorously, and his blood was flowing like a river. Yi Xian's mortal body withered silently, but the heaven-punishing halberd moved without any wind. The tip of the halberd pierced through Yi Xian's glabella, and a strand of chaotic light was rising, covering Yi Xian within. Where am I? In the boundless heaven and earth. Yi Xian did not know what kind of existence he was now. He stood in a mysterious place, and his entire body was murmuring. His eyes were extremely perplexed. If Yi Xian didn't remember wrongly, he was comprehending the heaven-punishing halberd in the bullfighting palace, in hopes of channeling the power of the heaven-punishing halberd for his own use. However, something unexpected happened, causing his indestructible primordial spirit to collapse. When he woke up again, he appeared in this mysterious space. Rumble! Before Yi Xian could regain his senses, the scene in front of him changed drastically. A pitch-black ray of light pierced through the heaven and earth, causing the scene in front of Yi Xian to change drastically as well. Eternity was boundless, and the heaven and earth were endless. A figure seemed to have crossed the river of time, and walked out from the chaos. The chaos fiend gods were roaring, and all living beings were mourning. The chanting of sutras reverberated in the heavens, and an aura of annihilation rose around this figure, slaughtering the heavens and destroying the earth, and traversing the past and the present. This figure did not allow others to see his appearance clearly, and there was not a trace of celestial light radiating from his body. There was only a wisp of dark fog surrounding his body, and it was extremely frightening to look at. Dong dong dong. The Tongtian moved the earth, and he was invincible. This was a kind of general momentum, and also a kind of invincible confidence, which was vividly displayed by this mysterious figure. Strong. Very strong, so strong that it was simply unimaginable. This was the feeling Yi Xian had towards this mysterious figure at this moment. Yi Xian dared to be 100% sure that this mysterious figure had definitely surpassed the sage to be, and perhaps could stand shoulder to shoulder with a sage. However, there seemed to be a voice in the unseen world telling Yi Xian that this figure was definitely not as simple as a sage. "Who are you?" Yi Xian roared. Unfortunately, this figure did not answer Yi Xian. He just stood in front of him and stared deeply at Yi Xian through that wisp of dark fog. Intimacy, peace of mind, and the illusion that they were connected by blood. This was the feeling that the figure gave Yi Xian. "Halberd, come." Suddenly, just as Yi Xian was about to approach this figure, the mysterious figure suddenly roared at the sky, causing Yi Xian to be rooted to the spot. Space and time in this part of the world also suddenly changed. Like the beating of a war drum, like the churning of a chaotic galaxy, that wisp of darkness grew in this part of the world, and a 3-meter-long halberd that had traversed the past and the present quietly appeared in the figure's hand. Chaotic Sky 7 kills halberd, life-severing. Space and time were inverted, and the heavens and the earth were destroyed. The mysterious figure swung the heaven-destroying halberd, and the power to kill the heavens and earth bloomed, disrupting the space and time in this part of the world. When he struck out with the halberd, his entire person disappeared in an instant, and only the heaven-destroying halberd remained. Wherever it passed, the world collapsed inch by inch, and was directly annihilated by the halberd. Yi Xian stared blankly at the scene in front of him, and the aura around him was extremely chaotic. His fists were tightly clenched together, because what this mysterious figure was doing was basically teaching him an unimaginable killing technique. Chaotic Sky 7 kills halberd? Yi Xian muttered to himself, and his entire person sank into an unfathomable state. In his mind, he constantly recalled the terrifying power of this halberd, and there was a faint feeling of understanding in his mind. Buzz! Space and time changed and returned to normal. When the mysterious figure appeared again, his hoarse and ancient voice slowly rang out in this part of the world. Chaotic Sky 7 kills halberd, chaotic heaven and earth, and destroy the past and present. If you can transcend, then this technique can truly be used by you. Unless it's a life and death crisis, don't use this technique, or you will definitely suffer a great calamity that has never happened before. The mysterious figure spoke, and slowly walked into the distance. However, his back view was lonely and desolate, and it made Yi Xian stare blankly, and an extremely familiar feeling appeared in his mind. "Tell me, who are you?" Yi Xian loudly roared. It was all because this figure gave him a sense of fear, causing his mind to tremble to the extreme. Suddenly, he turned around and the fog dissipated. The mysterious figure paused, and a handsome face appeared. He had delicate features, and he was extraordinarily handsome. There was a scholarly temperament on his face, but this face made Yi Xian completely speechless, and he even took a few steps back. He simply could not believe his own eyes. "I am you." The mysterious figure lightly smiled. The dark mist around him caused his body to dissipate, and his entire body disappeared from Yi Xian's eyes. Chapter 544. Dumbfounded, shocked, unimaginable, and in disbelief. These were Yi Xian's current emotions. This was because the face that appeared in Yi Xian's eyes was actually his own face. The same gaze, the same face. The only difference was that the other party's eyes were filled with vicissitudes of life and loneliness. This was also the difference between Yi Xian and this mysterious apparition. It was as if this mysterious apparition was Yi Xian's future. Appearing in front of him today was like crossing the barrier of time and space to meet his present self. He is my future. How is this possible? Yi Xian muttered in shock. He could not believe this fact no matter what, because this was simply a fantasy. breaking through the barrier of time and space, crossing the river of time, coming from the future to the present. Even a saint could not do this. This already involved the operation of time and space. It was simply unbelievable. There was a saying in Buddhism: past life, present life, and future life. Every person had 3 people in their life. These 3 people represented that person's life. If the previous me, the present me, and the future me could cultivate all 3 lives to perfection, they would be able to obtain the position of Amitabha Buddha. It was the position of a saint like Zhuanti in the legends. However, this saying was too illusory. Although there were 6 realms of samsara in this world, and all living things could be reincarnated, every life was different. It was impossible for 2 identical people to appear in one space and time. If such a thing really happened, it would only cause the way of heaven to collapse and all living things to be destroyed. The mysterious rules of the Great Way would also descend upon the 3 realms and destroy the 3 realms. However, the appearance of this mysterious apparition had broken this taboo. Yi Xian was certain that the person who appeared in front of him, even if it was not his future self, was definitely closely related to him. His thoughts were in a mess, as if he was in a dream. Yi Xian thought hard for a long time, but could not get the answer he wanted. Rumble! Suddenly this mysterious world cracked inch by inch. With a loud bang, this world disappeared. When Yi Xian opened his eyes again, he was still in Bullfighting Palace. The heaven-destroying halberd was still lying across his knees. The palace had no roof, and the sky was filled with stars. A gust of wind blew, causing Yi Xian's hair to flutter in the wind, causing his eyes to become extremely perplexed. Yi Xian looked into his own body, and saw that his indestructible primordial spirit was still there. The immortal energy in his body surged like a river. It was as if what happened just now was just a dream. It was simply unbelievable. However, Yi Xian knew that what he had just experienced was not a dream. This was because the chaotic Sky 7 Slaughter halberd was firmly engraved in his mind, and the halberd technique displayed by the mysterious phantom was also engraved in his soul. Yi Xian tried his best to suppress his fluctuating emotions. He caressed the pitch-black, icy body of the halberd. A feeling of blood connection appeared in his heart. What a good chaotic Heaven 7 Slaughter halberd, what a good life slash. With this halberd technique, you should be able to deal with all sorts of great enemies. Yi Xian softly muttered as a slight smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. 100 years passed, and time was like a song. To mortals, 100 years was their entire life. However, to immortals, 100 years was just the blink of an eye. Perhaps they would go into seclusion once, or visit a friend once. Rumble! The doors of Bullfighting Palace opened wide. Yi Xian was wearing a black robe, and was not dressed as the Celestial Emperor. He was slowly walking out of Bullfighting Palace. Greetings to the Celestial Emperor. The 24 heavenly inspectors, the 28 mansions of the heavenly cycle, the 36 stars of the heavenly spirit, the 72 stars of the earthly fiend, and the immortals of the celestial court were waiting outside Bullfighting Palace. They all bowed to Yi Xian to express their respect. Rumble! The firmament shook, and a dragon's roar pierced the heavens. In the distant firmament, Shen Gongbao rode the Celestial Emperor Dharma carriage, and stopped in front of Yi Xian. Shen Gongbao wore a black Taoist robe, and carried the celestial ending sword on his back. He bowed to Yi Xian and said, "This old minister is willing to go with the Celestial Emperor to the Niwa Palace." With the celestial ending sword in hand, all immortals would retreat. Even a pre-saint would have to think twice. Although Shen Gongbao was only Daluo Jingxian, he had the celestial ending sword in hand. This represented the attitude of the Tongtian. Even a pre-saint would have to be wary. If Yi Xian was defeated in the Niwa Palace, he could definitely bring Yi Xian back to the celestial court safely with the celestial ending sword and the reputation of the Tongtian. After all, everyone in the 3 realms knew that the Tongtian valued Yi Xian very much. Yi Xian was the hope of the Jie sect. Anyone who wanted to murder Yi Xian would be the mortal enemy of the Jie sect. We are willing to go with the Celestial Emperor to the Niwa Palace. Tens of thousands of immortals were begging. Whether it was the Daluo Jingxian or the Tai Xian immortals, all the immortals present bowed, and wanted to accompany Yi Xian to the Nuwa Palace. This trip to the Nuwa Palace is my personal matter. You all guard the celestial court. I can go alone, Yi Xian said calmly. You can't do that. Shen Gongbao's expression changed, and he stopped Yi Xian. He even bowed to Yi Xian and said anxiously, Celestial Emperor, this old minister doesn't dare to disobey you. But this old minister must accompany you to the Nuwa Palace. It was no wonder that Shen Gongbao was so anxious. This trip to the Nuwa Palace was full of Tongtian powerful divines, and it was suspected that there were sage-to-be participating in this event. If Yi Xian met with mishap, how could he explain it to the Tongtian? I have made up my mind. You don't have to say any more. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. His voice was resolute, and did not allow Shen Gongbao to continue persuading him. Yi Xian's idea was simple. This trip to the Nuwa Palace was full of powerful divines, and the weakest among them was at the second stage of Daluo. Even if he brought the immortals of the celestial court, it would only be a show of strength and power. It would be useless for him to go alone. Yi Xian was a man of his words. Not only Shen Gongbao knew this, but the other immortals also knew that Yi Xian's decision could not be changed. Celestial Emperor, since you insist on going alone, the old minister has nothing to say. But please take the immortal eliminating sword with you, so that the old minister can be at ease. Shen Gongbao was silent for a while. Then he put down the immortal eliminating sword and handed it to Yi Xian. Shen Gongbao's idea was simple. Since Yi Xian wanted to go alone, as long as he had the immortal eliminating sword, even if he encountered a sage-to-be, he could safely return to the celestial court. After all, the immortal eliminating sword was the spiritual treasure of the Tongtian. Even a sage-to-be would have to think twice. Okay, lend me the immortal eliminating sword for a while. Yi Xian nodded and did not refuse Shen Gongbao's kindness. He directly took the immortal eliminating sword, which made Shen Gongbao feel relieved. I will return to the celestial court in at most 100 years, or at least 30 years. You all will guard the celestial court. There must not be any mistakes. Yi Xian carried the immortal eliminating sword on his back. When he took a step out, he turned into a red cloud and shot toward the outside of the 33rd heaven. Farewell, Celestial Emperor. The immortals bowed and respectfully sent Yi Xian off. But there was a touch of worry in their eyes, because this trip to the Nuwa Palace was too dangerous. They were deeply afraid that Yi Xian would encounter a great disaster. After all, those who could go to the Nuwa Palace were all great mediums of the Tongtian. How could they be afraid of Yi Xian, the Celestial Emperor? Chapter 545. The wind and clouds had gathered, and a storm was approaching. All those who possessed great divine abilities had converged their gazes onto Nuwa's palace. Since the creation of the world, there had only been 6 saints besides Tao ancestor Hongjun, who had merged with the Tao to control the will of the heavens. They could be said to be supreme existences. The only female saint was Nuwa. At the beginning of the creation of the world, Gonggong knocked down Mount Buzhou. Nuwa refined stone to mend the blue sky. Later she molded earth to create man. These 2 great virtues made her a saint. When Saint Nuwa issued a decree to recruit a worthy son-in-law from Nuwa Palace, this was an unprecedented event in the 3 realms. Not to mention the Empyrean fairy's beauty, just being able to form a relationship with Saint Nuwa was a great opportunity. Yama, the underworld, the Earth Immortal 4 prefectures, and too many terrifying characters were all rushing to Nuwa Palace. As the saying went, one would not take up a job without a diamond. However, those who dared to participate in this event at Nuwa Palace were extremely confident in themselves. After all, those with weak cultivations were not qualified to enter these muddy waters. Rumble. Yi Xian was dressed in black and carried the immortal ending sword on his back. Astral winds blew in his face, causing his clothes to rustle. Every step he took covered a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers, and the zenith heaven immortal light around him violently blossomed. Yi Xian did not hide anything. He came with the momentum of the Celestial Emperor and the conviction to suppress all enemies. The Empyrean fairy could only become his woman. Nuwa Palace was located outside the 33 layers of heaven. It was also where the saint's dojo was located. It could be said to be a small world. Celestial light sprinkled down from the auspicious clouds of the 9 heavens. After traversing millions of miles and stepping through the 9 layers of clouds, Yi Xian stepped directly outside the 33 layers of heaven. The luminous sun star rumbled as it rotated. The resplendent Milky Way was vast and boundless. Each star was shining, and the Milky Way was churning. There were also many meteorites scattered in the starry sky, giving off a majestic feeling. An ancient path of starlight stretched out, and the holy light illuminated the starry sky. The stars streaked across the sky, drawing out a blueprint of the starry sky. The surging meteors were extremely dazzling, and they gave people a dizzy feeling. Rumble! Celestial light surged in all directions. Countless Tongtian great divination masters appeared outside the 33rd heaven. Some of them sat cross-legged in ancient chariots, some rode on ancient beasts, and some walked alone with a sword. Vile dragons roared, flood dragons roared, and ghost generals led the way. Tongtian greater demons galloped through the starry sky, causing the 33 heavens to tremble to the extreme. Yi Xian, one man and one sword, stood proudly in the starry sky. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was as if 2 great stars were rumbling and rotating within them. When he took a step forward, he quietly appeared above the starry sky. Rumble! The starry sky exploded as the sea of stars churned. The stars streaked across the sky above the ancient path. 9 vile dragons pulled a golden chariot from behind Yi Xian. Scram! Arrogant, despotic, domineering, and unreasonable. These 2 simple words represented the will of the person who came. The person pulling the chariot was a grand Luo demon monarch. A majestic golden figure was sitting cross-legged in the chariot. The person who shouted was the grand Luo demon monarch. The golden whip swung and whistled through the starry sky. Just the grand Luo demon king pulling the chariot was the second dividing line of the grand Luo realm. He violently whipped the 9 flood dragons with an undeniable arrogance. Brilliant sun, heavenly lord! A great divination master recognized the newcomer and exclaimed. Many great divination masters quickly moved out of the way to avoid clashing with Brilliant Sun, Heavenly Lord's chariot. Taoist in front, scram! The golden chariot rumbled as the 9 vile dragons ferociously roared. The grand Luo demon king pulling the chariot roared, and lashed at Yi Xian with his golden whip. At this moment, Yi Xian frowned. He didn't expect that someone would dare to attack him when he had just entered the 33 heavens. Furthermore, he had never heard of Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord, nor did he know who he was. Bang! Yi Xian pointed out with his finger. It was as if the celestial river had turned upside down, and the stars had exploded. The immortal light exploded from his fingertip, distorting space-time and suppressing the laws. The 9 vile dragons turned into a bloody mist. The grand Luo demon king, who was pulling the chariot, let out a miserable howl. His body cracked like a spider web as he fell under the golden chariot. Hiss! As the sound of someone sucking in a breath of cold air could be heard, the ancient path of the starry sky instantly became deathly silent. All the great divine abilities that passed by looked at Yi Xian in astonishment. They didn't know who this person was that dared to clash with heavenly monarch Sunday. Yi Xian didn't feel the puzzled gazes of the great divination masters. He suddenly turned around and continued walking along the starry sky path, as if he had just done something casual. Dao friend's cultivation is not bad, but you intend to leave after injuring my servant? Suddenly, before Yi Xian could take a few steps, a calm voice came from behind him. The 9 heavens' divine fire rose, distorting the laws of heaven and earth. The flames that could burn all things illuminated the starry sky path in a fiery red color. Yi Xian paused and slowly turned his head to look behind him. He saw a golden figure slowly walking out from the golden ancient chariot. The flames of the great sun 9 heavens burned around him, and his golden hair was like a golden sun, making it impossible for people to look directly at him. Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord's true form was an ancient golden crow that controlled the power of the sun. He was a terrifying figure in the 3rd watershed of Grand Luo, and a famous great divination master in ancient times. His 9 heavens' divine fire could burn all things, and there were few who could match him in the same realm. Although he wasn't famous in the three realms, anyone who knew about Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord knew that he was extremely difficult to deal with. Not many were willing to provoke him. The Golden Crow was domineering and had extraordinary talents. It controlled the essence of the sun. If Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord wanted to, he could turn into a golden sun and display a terrifying power that could destroy the world. Thump, thump, thump. Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord moved forward as the 9 heavens divine fire burned. The aura that could melt all things bloomed around him. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was as if 2 golden suns were burning in his eyes. He was slowly walking towards Yi Xian. Looking at Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord's terrifying cultivation, Yi Xian's expression didn't change. The aura around him didn't fluctuate at all. He looked at Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord with an extremely indifferent gaze. Do you have a death wish? Yi Xian's voice was very calm. So calm that it didn't have the slightest ripple. It was as if he was talking about something very casual. However, when it entered the ears of the heavenly monarch of the sun, it caused him to suffocate. A cold killing intent flashed through the eyes of the heavenly monarch of the sun. You are the first person who dares to speak to me like this in 3 million years. Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord put his hands behind his back and looked down at Yi Xian in a condescending manner. An extremely terrifying aura pressed down on Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't feel the aura that Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord displayed. He looked at Brilliant Sun Heavenly Lord with a look of contempt. Chapter 546. If I were you, I wouldn't talk so much nonsense, because people will die if they talk too much. Don't you understand that? Yi Xian coldly laughed. He slowly raised his right arm and hooked his finger towards the heavenly monarch of the sun. Come. Let this emperor see how capable you are, you evil creature. As the celestial emperor, I shall suppress all enemies in the world. This was Yi Xian's pride and his invincible confidence. No matter who stood in his way, he would suppress them. Anyone who refused to submit could only become a dead man. Whoosh! The various experts were in an uproar. The masters who were originally moving forward all surrounded Yi Xian and the heavenly monarch of the sun. A hint of excitement flashed through their eyes. After all, it had been a very long time since a battle between 2 peak golden heavenly immortals had taken place. Every single peak golden heavenly immortal was a revered existence in the 3 dimensions. So if they could witness a battle between peak golden heavenly immortals, even if they couldn't marry the 9th heavenly fairy, it would still make their trip worthwhile. Actually, all the great figures of the various powers were clearly aware of their own ability. Wanting to marry the mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens could be said to be as difficult as ascending the heavens. And their main objective was to come to New Wasdao Palace and witness the battle between the various great figures. Comprehending by analogy and understanding oneself was also a kind of cultivation. Naturally, all the great divinities were looking forward to it. They all hoped that there would be an earth-shattering battle between the 2 of them. At this moment, Brilliant Sun Sovereign was no longer calm. The heavenly fire around him burned terrifyingly. He looked at Yi Xian with terrifying murderous intent. Glorious Sun Heaven Monarch was an extremely proud and arrogant person. He had never put anyone below the sage-to-be realm in his eyes. But today, Glorious Sun Heaven Monarch realized that he had met someone who was even more arrogant than him. That person had actually challenged him directly. No matter who you are, you're courting death for daring to provoke me, Brilliant Sun Sovereign said coldly. The laws of heaven and earth around him were rioting. The 9 heavens' divine fire shot up from the ancient path of the starry sky, stirring up the galaxies and meteorites in all directions. Let's see how capable you are. Yi Xian smiled coldly. Great Sun Golden Sun. Brilliant Sun Monarch didn't waste any more words. He roared loudly, because no one dared to provoke him. Anyone who did would die. Rumble. A golden sun condensed in the starry sky, and the aura that could incinerate all things bloomed. The Sun Sovereign drew a circle with his hands, and golden runes filled the sky, converging into an extremely terrifying technique, which crashed down on Yi Xian. You dared to show off with such petty tricks. Yi Xian smiled contemptuously. He didn't even use the tribulation transcender transformation. When he punched out, the bright fist light illuminated the starry sky. The Tongtian's fist light directly shattered the golden sun into nothingness. Bang! The starry sky exploded, and the ancient paths shook. When the two extremely terrifying forces collided, the aftershock that leaked out shook the surroundings. And it also caused the various great ability users to use great techniques to isolate the aftershock of the two forces. Buzz! The power dissipated, and a light shadow appeared. Yi Xian stood in the center of the starry sky ancient path, indifferently looking at Brilliant Sun Sovereign in front of him. On the other hand, Brilliant Sun Sovereign's expression was cold, and his eyes were narrowed as he looked at Yi Xian. Who are you? Just a single strike was enough to make the sun-glorious heavenly monarch officially recognize Yi Xian. Although he wasn't famous in the three realms, he knew all the people at the peak of the golden immortal realm. Just that strike from before showed that Yi Xian wasn't a nobody. Heavenly Emperor Yi Xian. These simple words came out of Yi Xian's mouth, but it also stunned the various great ability users. They all looked at Yi Xian. Brilliant Sun Sovereign's eyes turned, and a look of understanding flashed across his eyes. I was wondering who it was. So it's the new Heavenly Emperor. No wonder you dare to block my path. Brilliant Sun Sovereign nodded, finally understanding who Yi Xian was. However, as a peak grand heavenly realm existence, he wasn't too afraid of Yi Xian's identity. After all, at their level, the so-called identity was next to nothing. Only cultivation was the true essence. Yi Xian, I've heard of your deeds, but you should never have offended me. Do you know who I am? Brilliant Sun Sovereign put his hands behind his back, and his posture was extremely arrogant. It was no wonder that Brilliant Sun Sovereign was so arrogant. He was an ancient golden crow, born from the fire essence of heaven and earth. When he was born, he had the cultivation of all heaven golden immortal, and there was a great possibility that he would become a quasi-saint in the future. Why would he care about Yi Xian? I'm not interested in knowing who you are, but if you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Yi Xian said calmly, looking at Brilliant Sun Sovereign, as if he was looking at a dead man. His words were filled with great disdain. Ever since Yi Xian stepped into the second grand heavenly realm and used the tribulation transcender transformation, he didn't care about peak grand heavenly realm experts. Brilliant Sun Sovereign's cultivation was only at the 8th heavenly realm. Although it would take some effort to kill him, it wasn't impossible. You're courting death. No matter how good Brilliant Sun Sovereign's temper was, he couldn't stand Yi Xian's disregard. Not to mention, he was an extremely arrogant person. This made him forget all his scruples about Yi Xian. His whole body turned into a ball of scorching sun and rushed toward Yi Xian. Die! Brilliant Sun Sovereign's true form was an ancient golden crow. In addition to the great divine ability of the ninth heaven's divine fire, his physical strength was also extremely terrifying. When he swung his fists, they carried a terrifying force, wanting to kill Yi Xian on the spot. I'll send you on your way. Yi Xian smiled sinisterly as he took a step forward and shot towards the heavenly monarch of the sun. The starry sky ancient path shook violently, and when he raised his fists, he mercilessly smashed towards the heavenly monarch of the sun. Bang! The two fists collided, causing the starry sky to explode. The two were sent flying backward, but the terrifying shockwaves caused the surrounding asteroids to explode and the galaxy to churn violently. Die! Yi Xian savagely roared. His origin immortal body glowed as he took a step forward, tearing through the starry sky and instantly appearing in front of Brilliant Sun Sovereign. His fist swung with a terrifying force, carrying an aura that could kill all things as they descended on Brilliant Sun Sovereign. In the face of Yi Xian's fists, Brilliant Sun Sovereign's expression changed. He hurriedly urged his immortal energy to transform his arms into golden crow claws that viciously swiped at Yi Xian. His finger bones were broken, and he let out a miserable howl. Something that caused all the great abilities to be shocked appeared. The tyrannical golden crow's claws were shattered inch by inch under Yi Xian's fist light, and his mangled palms were in an extremely miserable state. Yi Xian's zenith immortal body was too terrifying. When he stepped into the second watershed of the zenith immortal realm, His zenith immortal body had also improved greatly and became even more terrifying. Bang! The heavenly monarch of the sun was directly blasted flying. Several of his ribs were broken, and he couldn't help but spit out blood from his mouth. The 9 heavens' divine flames quickly covered him, and he borrowed the terrifying force of Yi Xian's fist to retreat backwards. Do you think you can leave? Yi Xian didn't back down. He was smiling savagely, a smile that was too sinister and terrifying. Chapter 547. Yi Xian did not relent after gaining the upper hand. He smiled savagely, and his smile was too sinister and terrifying. Star plucking. It was as if the Milky Way was hanging upside down, as if all things had turned to dust. Yi Xian's domineering voice rang out, and an extremely terrifying thing happened. Yi Xian's entire body was glowing. This was a light that transcended the heavens and the earth. His palm and fingers were reaching out, stirring up the luminous starry sky. The boundless galaxy and the stars in the heavens were rioting. Rumble! Since time immemorial, the stars stretched across the sky. Although a star was only 1,000,000 miles in size, and was rotating along a fixed orbit in the starry sky, under the suction force of Yi Xian's fingers, it actually deviated from its fixed orbit, and rumbled towards Yi Xian. Overturn the sea! Whoosh! The luminous celestial river overturned the sky, and the 10 million feet high waves roared. Under Yi Xian's terrifying grand technique, the starry river of 1,000,000 miles long rolled back towards him. Kill! Yi Xian raised the star with his palm, and when he slapped out, the resplendent star smashed towards heavenly monarch sun with an aura that could destroy the heavens and earth. However, Yi Xian's attack was not over yet. The galaxy river, which was millions of miles long, rumbled and collapsed. It carried an aura that could destroy all things as it surrounded Yi Xian. When Yi Xian performed a hand seal, the galaxy river, which was millions of miles long, rushed toward sun-shining emperor with the power of a landslide and a tsunami. Bang! The stars struck, the starry sky exploded, and the river surged, burying everything. When these two supreme arts were used by Yi Xian, heavenly monarch sun's face turned pale. The 9 heavens' divine fire burst out, protecting him in the center. Rumble! The stars within 1,000,000 miles were exploding, and the vast galaxy was evaporating. The entire starry sky was in turmoil. The 2 peerless arts drowned heavenly lord of sun in an instant, causing him to suffer an unimaginable calamity. The entire hall was bright, and the starry sky was in chaos. The dazzling brilliance illuminated the starry sky, causing the various great ability users to watch in shock. They were not shocked by Yi Xian's technique, but shocked that the mighty glorious sun star monarch had been beaten by Yi Xian to the point where he could not even fight back. An entire few tens of breaths of time passed before this area of the starry sky stopped raging, and the dazzling radiance gradually dispersed. Yi Xian was dressed in black. The celestial ending sword was sheathed diagonally on his back. His hands were behind his back as he looked into the distance. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was only indifference and ruthlessness. Huff, huff, huff. The sound of heavy breathing could be heard. Heavenly Lord of Sun was panting violently 100,000 miles away. However, he looked extremely miserable at that moment. His golden hair was disheveled, and the corners of his mouth were stained with blood. His stalwart body was also covered in blood. Clearly, he had suffered a great setback in the battle with Yi Xian. I thought you were very capable, but it turns out that you are just a piece of trash who bluffs. Yi Xian's words were filled with disdain. He didn't give the Sun Heavenly Monarch any face at all. This caused the Sun Heavenly Monarch to clench his fists tightly, as his eyes gradually turned crimson red as he looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, do you really think I am easy to bully? Rumble! The 9 heavens' divine fire was burning, and Heavenly Lord of Sun was blooming with boundless flames. Although he was at the 8th heavenly layer of Daluo heaven, his innate ability was above controlling the 9 heavens' divine fire. He had yet to use his true ability, so how could he be willing to lose to Yi Xian? I'll kill you with my palm. Yi Xian smiled coldly, and his voice echoed in the starry sky. How dare you? When had the heavenly monarch of the sun ever suffered such humiliation? This also caused him to roar in anger. The heavenly flames around his body burned to the extreme, as if he was about to use a truly terrifying great technique to fight with Yi Xian in the next moment. Haha! Suddenly, before Heavenly Lord of Sun could make a move, a golden figure walked through the starry sky. When the golden light dissipated, a handsome young man with a face as white as jade appeared. Rakemo! When the young man appeared, all the powerful experts were in an uproar. Their eyes narrowed slightly, and Heavenly Lord of Sun's expression changed drastically. The terrifying flames around him also temporarily stopped. Brother Sun, of all the people you could provoke, you just had to provoke Yi Tiandi. Aren't you just asking for it? Rakemo grinned at Heavenly Lord of Sun, then looked at Yi Xian. He said with a gentle expression, "Hearing about Yi Tiandi is not as good as meeting him in person. I have long heard of your unparalleled combat power. Today, I see that you really live up to your reputation." Humph. Suddenly, Heavenly Lord of Sun's heavenly fire was extinguished. He looked at Rakemo with slight fear, then glared at Yi Xian and said, "Yi Xian, don't be too proud. Let's see who's stronger in Nuwa Palace." After saying those words, Heavenly Lord of Sun turned into a crimson cloud and shot toward Nuwa Palace along the starry sky ancient path. Clearly, Rakemo's appearance had given him great pressure. "I am Daoist Rakemo, greetings Yi Daoyu." Although Rakemo looked like a young man, he had an elegant temperament. He cupped his hands at Yi Xian and greeted Yi Xian. As the saying went, one does not slap a smiling face. Yi Xian naturally would not make enemies for no reason. This also made him take a deep look at Rakemo, then cupped his hands and said, "Your cultivation is unfathomable. I am impressed." Yi Xian was not flattering Rakemo. He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Although Rock Demon was trying his best to conceal his aura, Yi Xian was still able to tell with a glance that this person's cultivation was at the 9th level of the Great Luo stage. Although his aura wasn't obvious, he was definitely an extremely difficult person to deal with. "I am fortunate enough to meet Yi Tiandi today. Why don't we travel together?" Rakemo smiled and invited Yi Xian. Yi Xian lightly smiled as he looked at Rock Demon's kind smile. If he refused this person's invitation, it would seem as if he was afraid of Rock Demon. This caused Yi Xian to nod his head and say, "Since fellow Taoist has invited me, how could I refuse?" Haha, Yi Tiandi really is a straightforward person. Rakemo laughed loudly and strolled over to Yi Xian's side. Rakemo and Yi Xian walked together. When this scene appeared before the eyes of all the powerful experts, fear flashed through their eyes. They looked at Yi Xian with strange gazes. Rakemo. His true form was the golden-winged Great Peng, and he was an extremely powerful demon. Don't be fooled by the fact that he looked like a refined young man in his human form, making him seem harmless to humans and animals. The fact that he was called the Demon Rock also proved that he was extremely vicious and had no bottom line. He would do anything that was beneficial to him. It was said that Rock Demon had offended a sage-to-be in the past and was chased for hundreds of millions of miles by that sage-to-be. He was almost killed by that sage-to-be, but he managed to escape with his life by relying on various secret techniques. From this, it could be seen that Rock Demon was not an ordinary person. Even among Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals, he stood at the peak. To be able to remain unfettered while being chased by a quasi-saint, just this ability alone was enough to make all the Daluo Jinxian extremely fearful. But today, Rakemo wanted to travel with Yi Xian. None of the powerful experts believed that Rakemo had no ulterior motives towards Yi Xian. This was because those who understood Rakemo knew that he was someone who would not do anything without benefits. Anyone who stuck to him would not have a good ending. Chapter 548. The Starry Sky Ancient Path crisscrossed outside the 33 layers of heaven. The Starry Sky Ancient Path where Yi Xian was at was only one of them. The battle between him and the glorious Sun Sovereign was also just a small interlude. The luminous starry sky had countless stars. It was a land beyond the heavens, and also a place for saints. If the Starry Sky Ancient Path did not appear, even Daluo Jinxian would not be able to find the location of the Nuwa Palace. Yi Xian and Peng Emo walked together. The two of them chatted and laughed along the way. Those who did not know would think that they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. However, only the two of them knew that they were testing each other with their words. How could there be any affection between them? It seems that Big Brother Yi is determined to get the Empyrean Fairy. If there's anything you need from me, just say the word, and I'll do my best to help. Along the way, Peng Emo took advantage of the situation and insisted on calling Yi Xian Big Brother, and called himself a worthy younger brother. This made Yi Xian sneer in his heart. Peng Emo was extremely shrewd and did not put on any airs. Even though he was at the peak of the grand heavenly realm, he still lowered himself to the extreme. However, this kind of person was undoubtedly terrifying. He was a true villain with a terrifying cultivation. When these two characteristics were combined, Yi Xian could not help but pay attention to him. This was because people like Peng Emo would call you Big Brother, and then turn hostile and stab you in the back. Yi Xian dared to believe in his judgment, because he also had such characteristics. A worthy younger brother must be joking. I heard that a quasi-saint will be coming to the Niwa Palace this time. It won't be easy for me to marry the Empyrean Fairy, Yi Xian said with a smile. Don't worry, Big Brother. Even if a quasi-saint really comes, with the celestial extinguishing sword behind you, you won't be afraid of him, Peng Emo said with a laugh. Hearing Emo Peng's words, a wisp of understanding quietly flashed past Yi Xian's eyes. So Emo Peng hadn't come for him, but for the immortal ending sword on his back. However, what surprised Yi Xian was that the terminating celestial sword was wrapped in black cloth. Not only did its aura not leak out, it also did not reveal any clues. How did Rock Demon know that he was carrying the terminating celestial sword? Rumble. The starry space swayed as the ancient path glowed. Just as the two of them were chatting, the end of the ancient path also appeared. A majestic palace floated in the boundless starry space. Niwa Palace. It was dazzling and resplendent with thousands of strands of auspicious energy. Moreover, there was even a palace with supreme celestial light that coiled around in all directions. A boundless grand aura assaulted the face, and it gave off a boundless and heavy feeling. Chi. Chi. Brilliant lights flashed across the 9 heavens, and one after another, ancient paths were connected to the Niwa Palace. On each of these paths, there were great experts rushing towards the Niwa Palace. Big Brother, the Niwa Palace is right in front of us. Let's not waste any more time and hurry over. As Rock Demon spoke, he took the lead and shot towards Niwa's palace. This caused Yi Xian to lightly smile, as he transformed into a streak of light, and followed behind Rock Demon. Clang clang clang. It sounded like the morning bell, and the evening drum, like the celestial music from the 9 heavens. The ancient bell chimes reverberated in the Niwa Palace. One after another, the ancient paths of the starry sky disappeared. In front of the Niwa Palace, there were more than 1,000 great practitioners from all over the world. It was all-encompassing, and too much for the eye to take in. The Tongtian immortal light was steaming, and the demonic light was blooming. When the Tongtian great mediums from all over gathered in front of the Niwa Palace, it made this part of the world extremely lively. Even the surrounding laws of heaven and earth were slightly disrupted. Every single person here was not a nobody in the 3 realms. Any one of them was a great figure, who could be revered as an ancestor. Their lifespans were also extremely long. Even the various great orthodoxies had to treat them as guests of honor, and did not dare to slight them in the slightest. Whoosh. When Yi Xian and Rock Emo arrived in front of the Niwa Palace, they naturally attracted the attention of the great practitioners from all over. When they saw Rock Emo and Yi Xian coming together, their eyes narrowed slightly. Then, they looked away, and waited for the gates of the Niwa Palace to open. At this moment, Yi Xian placed his hands behind his back, and looked at the great practitioners in all directions. Wherever his gaze landed, a solemn look flashed across Yi Xian's eyes. Strong, very strong, simply terrifyingly strong. That was Yi Xian's mood. That was because the person with the weakest cultivation here was at the 2nd grand heavenly realm. As for the 3rd grand heavenly realm, there were dozens of them, ranging from the 7th to the 9th heavenly realm. Among these 1,000 people, there were a few figures that Yi Xian remembered deeply in his mind. There was a yellow-robed Taoist. His face was haggard and his eyes were lifeless. A faint yellow light covered him. Although he did not reveal any aura around him, the great practitioners around him maintained a distance of 10,000 feet from him. There was a stalwart figure shrouded in dark light. He wore an imperial crown on his head and had a rough appearance. He wore a cold imperial robe and stood proudly in the center with his hands behind his back. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was an aura of disdain for the world. There was another person, a black-robed youth. Like Yi Xian, he had a sword sheathed diagonally on his back. His jet-black hair draped behind his head, and he was resting with his eyes closed, giving off the feeling that he was hidden in a sheath. There was an old man with white hair and a beard. He wore a bluish-white Taoist robe and gave off the feeling of an immortal. The grand heavenly realm around him rippled faintly as he smiled and chatted with the great practitioners in all directions. Yi Xian sensed that these four were all at the 9th heavenly realm. If they could break through the grand heavenly realm, they would enter the ranks of the quasi-saints. Of course, these were only the terrifying figures that Yi Xian sensed. There were even some whose auras were not obvious. Even with Yi Xian's probing, he could not sense their cultivation. The quasi-saints that Yi Xian had always regarded as great enemies did not appear at all. This made Yi Xian frown. He did not know if the rumor of the quasi-saints coming to the Niwa Palace was true. Perhaps it was because Yi Xian's gaze wasn't concealed at all. But when he examined the four people at the 9th level of the All-Heaven stage, the four of them also looked towards Yi Xian. The yellow-robed Taoist's face was haggard. He glanced indifferently at Yi Xian, and then closed his eyes without any other expression. The stalwart figure shrouded in dark light looked coldly at Yi Xian. When his eyes opened and closed, a hint of surprise flashed through them. Then, he no longer looked at Yi Xian and did not say anything. Good sword. The black-robed youth suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were like lightning and swords. He suddenly stared at the celestial ending sword behind Yi Xian. His voice was hoarse and stiff, as if he had not spoken for thousands of years. The white-robed Taoist smile disappeared. When he looked at Yi Xian, his face instantly turned gloomy. A hint of killing intent flashed through his eyes, and then quickly disappeared without a trace. Big brother, it seems that you have been targeted. Peng Emo secretly transmitted his voice and laughed. Do you know who these four people are? Yi Xian asked softly. It was no wonder that Yi Xian did not know these four people. It had only been 10,000 years since he became an earthly immortal. How could he know these people? This also made him ask Peng Emo, Big brother, listen to me in detail. These four people have quite a big background. Peng Emo smiled and quickly introduced the four people to Yi Xian. Chapter 549. The yellow-clothed Taoist's real name was the Netherworld Taoist. His true form was a ghost immortal from the Netherworld. He attained Tao in the prehistoric age and cultivated the Netherworld immortal scripture. Unlike other ghost immortals, his Netherworld water could destroy people's primordial spirit and transform it into a human body. He was an extremely terrifying big shot from the Netherworld. The stalwart man with the Emperor's crown on his head was even more prominent. He was one of the 5 Ghost Emperors, and was known as the Ghost Emperor of the East, Shin Tuesday. His Ghost Dao technique was second to none in the 3 realms. The black-clothed youth had a mysterious origin. No one knew where he came from. They only knew that after the Great God Investiture Tribulation, the black-clothed youth appeared out of nowhere and fought with Mahamayuri. Although he was defeated by Kong Xian, he became famous after the battle and was called Sword Demon by various almighty figures. As for the last white-clothed Taoist, he was much more famous because he was one of the 2 vice sect masters of the Chan sect. He was also Yuan Shi Tianzuan's personal disciple, Immortal Wang of the South Pole. Hearing Rock Mo's introduction of the 4 people, Yi Xian suddenly understood. No wonder Immortal Wang of the South Pole looked at him with such an unfriendly gaze. Obviously, he had killed too many people from the Chan sect. As a member of the Chan sect, how could Immortal Wang of the South Pole be nice to him? If they were not in front of the Niwa Palace, Immortal Wang of the South Pole would definitely seek justice from him. Yi Xian already knew the origins of the four of them, but the one that Yi Xian was most interested in was this black-clothed youth, because this black-clothed youth was a member of the witch clan. Although he had concealed his aura completely, Yi Xian cultivated the undying immortal scripture, and there were many secret techniques of the witch clan recorded within it. Under the sensing of his aura, he was able to see through the sword demon's true body with a single glance. Rumble. Just as Yi Xian was deep in thought, he saw the door to Niwa Palace open with a rumble. A palace maid walked out of Niwa Palace. This caused the outside of Niwa Palace to suddenly fall silent. Everyone's gaze was focused on this palace maid. Her Highness Niwa has decreed that tomorrow morning at the Primal Chaos Taoite Temple, the one who wins will take the Empyrean Fairy as his wife. After the palace maid finished speaking, she entered the Niwa Palace. However, the world around her suddenly changed. Pavilions and palaces appeared one after another. Clearly, they were temporary resting places for the various great powers. Although these thousands of people were not nameless, they did not have the qualifications to enter the Niwa Palace, because the Niwa Palace did not allow men to enter. This was also a rule of the Niwa Palace. Chi. The various great powers entered the palaces and pavilions one by one, waiting for the opening of tomorrow's event. Under the Rock Demon King's invitation, Yi Xian and Yi Xian entered the closest palace together. Star Palace. This was the Taoite temple that Yi Xian was currently residing in. The Rock Demon King chatted briefly with him for a while before leaving. However, his words indicated that he wanted to experience the Tongtian's celestial ending sword. But Yi Xian tactfully declined. Only after the Rock Demon King left did Yi Xian sit cross-legged in the center of the Taoite temple. A strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He could finally confirm that the Rock Demon King wanted to borrow the celestial ending sword. This was also his goal in approaching him. Of course, the Rock Demon's cultivation was unfathomable. Although he was extremely humble in front of Yi Xian, it did not mean that he was a useless person. On the contrary, the Rock Demon King was completely on par with the four people that Yi Xian had seen before. If Yi Xian was not mistaken, the Rock Demon King's visit to the Niwa Palace this time was probably not for the Empyrean Fairy. The absence of quasi-saints and the gathering of grand heavenly immortals. This event is getting more and more interesting, Yi Xian said softly, a hint of hostility flashing through his eyes. Some people might ask, could it be that Yi Xian spent so much effort to come to the Niwa Palace to marry the Empyrean Fairy? As mentioned before, Yi Xian treated women only as tools to be used. The so-called love did not exist in him at all. Yi Xian wanted to marry the Empyrean Fairy. First of all, this woman was already his. As a man, Yi Xian would not allow other men to touch the Empyrean Fairy in the slightest. The second reason was that the celestial court had just been established and still lacked the Queen Mother. This was also the reason why Yi Xian had to marry the Empyrean Fairy. This was because only the Empyrean Fairy could convince all the people of the three realms, and only her identity could assume the position of the Queen Mother. The third reason was that the Empyrean Fairy was the disciple of the Niwa. As his cultivation gradually increased, he would eventually have to face the six saints of the heavens and earth in the future. Marrying the Empyrean Fairy would also allow him to form a relationship with the Saint Niwa. As for the last reason, it was also the most important one. The Empyrean Fairy had the born Taoism aptitude. In the yin-yang world, she was in perfect harmony with Yi Xian, allowing Yi Xian to break through to the fourth sky of Daluo. If he could cultivate the yin-yang dual cultivation way with the Empyrean Fairy for a long time, his cultivation would improve rapidly. Moreover, Yi Xian had a faint premonition that the Empyrean Fairy was the key to him stepping into the sage-to-be, using strength to prove one's way and become the saint of all saints. This was an unprecedented path, breaking the limits of this world, transcending the three realms, and becoming a saint above the heavenly way was Yi Xian's ambition. This path was difficult and rugged. Perhaps one wrong step would lead to death. However, Yi Xian had no one to accompany him on this path. All his family and friends were buried in the yellow soil. This was also faintly in line with the emotionless method. the Taishang emotionless slaughtering the world. Not only did he kill the enemies of the world, but he also killed those who blocked his path. Perhaps he would also kill those who were close to him. Only in this way could he achieve supreme cultivation. The next day at 7 in the morning, dong dong dong, 81 consecutive bell tolls were ringing. The pavilions and palaces slowly dissipated. The luminous starry sky rumbled and shook. A beam of chaotic light sprinkled down, causing the space-time of this world to suddenly change. Buzz! The stars moved and the space-time changed. Large stars lay across the starry sky. The boundless sea of stars churned violently. In the deepest part of the sea of stars, a saint light slowly bloomed, as if she was the only one in the world. Saint Nuwa. She did not reveal her appearance or power. She seemed to not exist in this world. She was silent and immeasurable. The heavenly way saint was vividly displayed on her body. Rumble! A beam of light shot out from the depths of the sea of stars. This light was like the light of dawn. It was so dazzling that people could not open their eyes. When the light dissipated, a chaotic Tao field that spanned millions of miles appeared. Immortal light sprinkled down, and the sound of Tao rumbled. This chaotic Tao field was paved with white jade crystals. Extremely mysterious patterns were engraved on it, causing people to feel heavy at a glance. Dong dong dong. Lotuses bloomed in the void, and the sound of Tao rumbled. A beautiful figure stepped through the starry sky. She was dressed in a long white dress. Her hair was tied into a bun, and her eyes were abnormally bright like stars. The Empyrean Fairy, the goddess of the three realms. When she stood in the center of the chaotic Tao field, all the powerful beings suddenly fell silent. Many people looked at the Empyrean Fairy with infatuation. Chapter 550. The Empyrean Fairy was a peerless celestial goddess. She was devastatingly beautiful. Although she did not smile, the Empyrean Fairy was already the brightest star in the primal chaos Tao field. Greetings, Empyrean Fairy. The various experts stood up and greeted her. Although it was not a grand gesture, it showed how extraordinary and lofty the Empyrean Fairy was. Of course, not everyone greeted the Empyrean Fairy. The peak grand heavenly immortals merely nodded at the Empyrean Fairy as a greeting. This was the pride of peak grand heavenly immortals. After all, they were peak grand heavenly immortals, and could step into the ranks of quasi-saints at any time. Although the chances were slim, it was not impossible. Although the Empyrean Fairy was Nuwa's disciple, it was not enough for them to lower themselves. The Empyrean Fairy stood at the center of the primal chaos Tao field, and was looking at the various experts. When Yi Xian entered her sight, her breathing stopped for a moment. Then, the corners of her mouth curled into a smile as she looked at Yi Xian and nodded at him. Silence! Silence! Deathly silence! The Empyrean Fairy's obvious smile at Yi Xian caused the various experts' expressions to change slightly. They all looked at Yi Xian's direction, and looked at Yi Xian with great hostility. That bitch! Yi Xian's expression turned cold. He did not need to think to know that the Empyrean Fairy was doing it on purpose. She was simply letting the various experts take special care of him. Hee hee, the rock devil chuckled. Brother, it seems like the Empyrean Fairy has a good impression of you. I wonder if you can enjoy such good fortune? Yi Xian did not respond to the rock devil's teasing. He only narrowed his eyes and looked at the Empyrean Fairy before closing his eyes slightly. He was like an old monk in meditation and was not disturbed by anything outside. At the center of the primal chaos Tao field, the Empyrean Fairy smiled as she looked at Yi Xian's appearance. A trace of playfulness flashed through her eyes. Although the Empyrean Fairy had lost her virginity to Yi Xian, it did not mean that she did not hate Yi Xian. After all, the two of them had not known each other for a long time. If Yi Xian had not taken her body, then why would the Nuwa hold this grand meeting? Of course, the Empyrean Fairy was also a prideful person. Although she had heard from the Nuwa that Yi Xian might be the heaven's chosen saint, this was only a guess. If Yi Xian emerged victorious from the various experts, then it would prove that Yi Xian was very likely to be the heaven's chosen saint. Marrying him would not be a disgrace to the Empyrean Fairy's status. My husband will stand at the peak of the three realms, and will become a quasi-saint in the future. Only then will he be a good match for me. It's not too late for fellow Taoists to withdraw from this grand meeting. If you enter the primal chaos Tao right, and lose your life, then the gains will not make up for the losses. The Empyrean fairy gently opened her cherry lips, and her voice echoed in the primal chaos Tao right. Obviously, the Dark Maiden of the Nine Heavens was warning those with weak cultivations that the son-in-law selection of Nuwa's Tao Palace this time wasn't a game, and it carried the danger of death. After all, everyone present here wasn't easy to deal with, and if they were to die here, then it was the path they'd chosen. With that, the Empyrean fairy slowly retreated from the primal chaos Tao right. A golden lotus appeared beneath her, allowing her to sit in the starry sky. She smiled as she waited for the grand meeting to begin. Clang, clang, clang. 18 consecutive bell rings rang out. An old woman silently appeared in the center of the primal chaos Tao right. She first clasped her hands at the various experts before slowly explaining the rules of the grand meeting. The rules of the grand meeting were very simple, but they could also be described as very unreasonable. Anyone who entered the primal chaos Tao right would be subjected to consecutive battles. Anyone who could stand at the end and suppress the various experts would emerge victorious. The details of the rules were as follows. There would be 16 battles in the ring, and there would be a total of 16 years. Anyone who could remain in the primal chaos Tao right for a year would advance to the next round. When the 16 years were up, the 16 strongest people would emerge. In the second round, the 16 strongest people would form groups of 2. The 8 strongest people would then advance to the third round. The third round would also be decided by drawing lots. The 8 strongest people would draw lots again and form groups of 2. The fourth round would determine the 4 strongest people. In the fourth round, the 4 would form groups of 2 and draw lots again to determine the final 2. The 2 strongest people would emerge, and the winner would become the Empyrean fairy's husband. When the old woman finished explaining the rules, the various experts' expressions changed slightly. Most of them did not look too good. That was because the rules were too unreasonable. The last few rounds were still manageable, as they relied on their cultivation and battle prowess to defeat their opponents. However, in the first round, not only did they have to suppress the various experts with cultivation, but they also had to rely on luck. One had to know that there were more than 1,000 Daoyuo Jingxian present, and the weakest among them was at the second watershed. It was almost impossible to remain in the ring for a year. The first round was simply a battle of attrition. If a person defended the arena for a year and defeated numerous golden immortals successively, then the person's injuries and cultivation would plummet. If someone took advantage of the opportunity to enter the arena at the last moment and defeat the person who defended the arena, then it would simply be too unfair. Although the various powerful cultivators were dissatisfied, no one retorted. This was because everyone knew that although this rule seemed unfair, it was actually the best way to select the strongest 16 people. True experts were not afraid of challenges. Even if there were people who took advantage of the situation, they would definitely be suppressed on the spot. To put it bluntly, the rules set by the Nuwa Palace were very simple. The strong would always be strong, and the weak would be useless. Although luck played a large role, luck was also a kind of strength. Of course, luck played a small part. The true experts were not afraid of such rules at all. Dang! The bell rang, and the event officially began. The old woman slowly retreated from the Chaos Dojo. A huge incense stick was lit, and when the incense burned out, it would be the end of the year. The starry sky was silent, and the experts were silent. Although the event had officially begun, no one walked up to the Chaos Dojo. Obviously, everyone knew that whoever went up first would suffer a great loss. Interesting. Suddenly, a cold laugh was heard. The Ghost Emperor of the East, Shun Tu, slowly stood up. When he took a step forward, his body was surrounded by a dark light, and he instantly appeared in the center of the Chaos Dojo. I am the Ghost Emperor of the East, Shun Tuesday. If any of you are dissatisfied, you can come up and fight. He was one of the 5 Ghost Emperors of the Underworld, the ruler of the Eastern Underworld. He was a peak grand heavenly realm existence. When he stepped onto the Chaos Dojo first, the various experts narrowed their eyes, but no one said anything. The Ghost Emperor of the East was not just for show. He was one of the 5 great emperors of the underworld, a supreme existence even in the 3 realms. As long as a quasi-saint did not appear, no one dared to say that they could defeat Shin Tuesday. At this moment, Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void, 3,000 black strands of hair hanging behind his head. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Shun Tu indifferently, but he had no intention of getting up. Chapter 551. Since the first round was to determine the strongest 16, there was no need for him to fight Shin Tu right from the start. After all, the defending stage had only just begun. Even if Shin Tu was the winner of the first year, there were still 15 empty spots. Haha, I've long heard that Senior Shin Tu's ghost Dao has reached great heights. Although Junior's cultivation is weak, I still hope Senior can give me some pointers. Suddenly, a beam of Een light shot toward the Chaos Dojo. When the Een light dissipated, a devil-faced boy who was only a meter tall appeared. He had fangs, devil eyes, a greenish-purple complexion, and a dark green copper ring in his hand. He looked like a living devil, giving off a gloomy and terrifying feeling at first glance. Three-eyed devil child. I didn't expect that old ghost to still be alive. Peng Yamo was slightly stunned, but then a smile appeared on his face as he looked at three-eyed devil child with a profound gaze. Who is he? Yi Xian asked softly after hearing Peng Mo's words. Big brother, you might not know, but three-eyed devil child was a ghost king of the underworld. Although his cultivation is only at the 6th heavenly layer, his ghost Dao evil arts are extremely powerful. Look at the jade ghost copper ring in his hand. It was refined from 9 Een sunflower water and yellow spring blood. Even a peak grand heavenly layer would be severely injured if touched by it. Peng Yamo paused for a moment and looked at Eastern Ghost Emperor Shin Tu with a slightly mocking gaze. Moreover, Eastern Ghost Emperor Shin Tu was three-eyed devil child's master. Master and disciple? Yi Xian was slightly stunned after hearing Peng Mo's words. He then looked at the 2 people in the Primal Chaos Dao field with a trace of surprise in his eyes. Primal Chaos Dao field. Shin Tu's expression was cold as a cold light flashed in his eyes. He looked at three-eyed devil child with extremely ruthless killing intent. Vile spawn. I didn't expect you to still be alive, Shin Tu said coldly. Kakik. The three-eyed ghost child was a dwarf, and at this moment, he was laughing loudly, the jade ghost copper ring in his hand jingling, and his pair of fangs flashing coldly, as he stared at Shin Tu with a sinister look in his eyes. Shin Tu, back then, you took me as your disciple because you wanted to refine ghost child's body, to help you break through to the 9th heavenly layer of the grand immortal realm. But you never imagined that I would discover your scheme. Although you discovered it very early on and wanted to kill and refine me, I still managed to escape into the evil ghost path and survive. The three-eyed ghost child spat out venomously. The jade ghost copper ring in his hand buzzed and emitted a dark green light. Humph. Shin Tu's eyes narrowed slightly as he smiled contemptuously. This emperor taught you how to refine this blue ghost copper ring. Although it is extremely sinister, with your current cultivation, don't you think using it to kill me is child's play? Shin Tu, you are the ghost emperor of the east of this place. If I wasn't fully prepared, how could I dare to appear in front of you? The three-eyed ghost child laughed ferociously. Evil ghost devours the heavens. Suddenly, the three-eyed ghost child shook the jade ghost bracelet. Halos of light rippled out as the miserable wails of thousands of evil spirits rang out. An extremely terrifying ghastly mist permeated the surroundings, instantly enveloping the entire chaotic hall of Dao. Damn, it's actually the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array. No wonder this old ghost dares to appear in front of Shin Tuesday, outside the Dao field. Peng Yamo suddenly stood up and looked at the Primal Chaos Dao field with glowing eyes. There was a fiery look in his eyes. Clearly, he coveted the three-eyed ghost child's grand technique. Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array? Hearing these words, Yi Xian was stunned. This array was recorded in the Immortal scripture. It was a ghost Dao grand array with the terrifying power to kill immortals and gods. Although it was not as powerful as the inverse immortal array diagram in his hand, it was not far off. The fact that this array was recorded in the immortal scripture was enough to show how terrifying the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array was. This array was extremely ancient, and was also an extremely famous grand array of the Ghost Immortal lineage. What was the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array? Heavenly slaughter, earthly slaughter, and ghost slaughter. When these three slaughter arrays were combined into one, they could completely surpass a realm to kill a great enemy. However, the only drawback was that it would cause the cultivation of the person controlling the array to regress by a realm, making it impossible for him to improve his cultivation for the rest of his life. Although Yi Xian also knew how to set up the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array, this array was of little value to him. It also had many restrictions, and was of no use to him at all. After all, he had the inverse immortal array diagram in his hand, so he was not interested in the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array's self-harming method. Although Yi Xian was not interested in this array, it did not mean that the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array was weak. On the contrary, this array was extremely terrifying and contained great power. It was just that the price to use it was too great. From this, it could be seen how much the three-eyed ghost child hated Shin Tuesday. Even if his cultivation would regress, he would not hesitate to stop at the second grand heavenly realm. Kill. The jade ghost copper ring shook, and the roar of evil spirits came from the primal chaos Dao field, attracting Yi Xian's attention. Ghost fog filled the sky, evil spirits roared, and miserable screams could be heard from time to time. No one could see what was happening in the primal chaos Dao field. Bang bang bang. The starry sky exploded, and the Dao field shook violently. After several dozen breaths, the ghost fog slowly dissipated. At the center of the primal chaos Dao field, green blood was splattered all over the ground. The three-eyed ghost child was half kneeling on the ground, but the jade ghost copper ring in his hand had been smashed into Shintu's chest, causing green blood to drip down from Shintu's chest. Hell Ghost 3 slaughtering array. It's capable of cutting down one's physical body and destroying one's yuan spirit. Shintu, today will be the day you die. The three-eyed ghost child grinned fiercely, glaring towards Shintu with extreme hatred. Such a scene shocked all the great masters present. No one had expected that the Eastern Ghost Emperor Shintu would be defeated at the hands of the three-eyed ghost child. Was this Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array so terrifying that even the Eastern Ghost Emperor could not resist it? Although it was difficult for the great masters present to accept this fact, the scene at this moment was indeed that Shintu had been severely injured. The green blood on his chest was too dazzling, proving that the Eastern Ghost Emperor had been defeated by the three-eyed ghost child. The three-eyed ghost child is going to die. Yi Xian slowly shook his head, his voice extremely calm, but his eyes flashed a strange light as he stared at Shin Tuesday. Big brother, don't joke around. This Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array and the Jade Ghost copper ring are. Before General Peng Yamo could finish his words, Shin Tu's chuckle came from the primal chaos Dao field, causing Peng Mo's words to come to an abrupt halt as he stared towards the primal chaos Dao field in shock. At the center of the primal chaos Dao field, blood continued to drip from Shin Tu's chest, but as more and more blood flowed out of his body, an extremely terrifying light began to emerge from his body as a massive amount of green blood began to glow. The terrifying sound of crashing waves suddenly echoed throughout the starry sky. Dark Sea Song. Shin Tu sneered coldly, his voice exploding through the primal chaos Dao field. Every drop of his blood began to boil, and then expand infinitely, directly converging into a 10,000-kilometer-wide sea of blood that submerged the three-eyed ghost child in front of his horrified eyes. Chapter 552. Suppress. Shintu glowed. This was a dark light that could annihilate all things. He formed a seal with both hands, causing the blood sea to surge, and suppressed the three-eyed ghost child in the depths of the blood sea. Ah! The three-eyed ghost child howled miserably. The jade ghost copper bracelet was being destroyed inch by the sea of blood. His ghost immortal body was also being destroyed by the sea of blood. Even his primordial spirit was dimming. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Why can't the Hell Ghost 3 slaughter array kill you? The three-eyed ghost child was being suppressed in the blood sea. His eyes were red with unwillingness as he roared at Shin Tuesday, "My good disciple, have you forgotten? You stole the Hell Ghost 3 slaughtering formation from your master. Unfortunately, you don't know that the Hell Ghost 3 slaughtering formation you stole back then was not complete at all. You can die in peace now." Shin Tu sneered contemptuously. The wound on his chest healed rapidly. He took a step forward and suddenly appeared in the middle of the blood sea. Amidst the three-eyed ghost child's mournful and unwilling roar, Shin Tu slammed his palm down, directly turning the three-eyed ghost child into ashes. Hua hua hua. The blood sea surged and roared. When Shin Tu withdrew his seal, the blood sea slowly dissipated like a bubble, causing the entire primal chaos Dao field to suddenly fall silent. I wonder if there are any other fellow Taoists who would like to challenge me? Shin Tu crossed his hands behind his back and looked down indifferently at the various powerful experts. He had the supreme prestige of a ghost emperor of hell. The ghost emperor of the East, Shin Tu, one of the 5 great emperors of hell, was not just a title. He had the cultivation base of a Tongtian and was in the 9 heavens of Daoyuo Jingxian. Not to mention, his ghost Dao grand arts had reached the pinnacle. Even among the 1,000 or so Daoyuo Jingxian here, he was a peak existence. The might of the ghost emperor was too dazzling and too frightening. No one dared to take the field again, because all the powerful divine ability masters were well aware that they were no match for Shin Tuesday. If they really did take the field, they would only end up as dead souls at his hands. When Shin Tu's eyes opened and closed, he swept his gaze over the various great divine ability masters. When his gaze met Yi Xian's, his expression froze for a moment before a trace of contempt appeared on his face. Only then did he withdraw his gaze. Provocation, a naked provocation. Yi Xian could completely feel Shin Tu's disdain towards him. Yi Xian, Shin Tu did not put him in his eyes. It was obvious that the 9 heavens profound maiden had intentionally expressed goodwill towards Yi Xian. This had already caused Shin Tu to view Yi Xian as a thorn in his side. Naturally, he wanted to personally defeat Yi Xian in front of the 9 heavens profound maiden, to prove the strength of the Eastern Ghost Emperor. Big brother, looks like this Shin Tu doesn't put you in his eyes at all? Rock Demon had the intention to sow discord as he teased Yi Xian. You talk too much nonsense. Suddenly, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes at Peng Mo, a gloomy light flashing across his eyes. Peng Mo's face froze for a moment before he smiled flatteringly, and no longer teased Yi Xian. However, a cold light flashed across his eyes before it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Something interesting had happened. Shin Tu sat cross-legged in the center of the primal chaos palace, like an old monk meditating with his eyes closed. Even after a year had passed, no one dared to step forward and fight him. Dang! A bell rang, signaling the end of the year. Shin Tu slowly opened his eyes and walked out of the primal chaos palace indifferently. This meant that he had advanced to the second round. The Yellow Springs is long, the souls of the dead accompany me. This poor Taoist has lived in the depths of the Yellow Springs for a long time. I wonder which fellow Taoist is willing to fight with this poor Taoist? The Yellow Springs Taoist's face was haggard, and his figure was slightly stooped, like an old man on the verge of death. Even when he spoke, he was panting heavily. Where was the demeanor of a master? 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He didn't walk on air, nor did he display any supreme power. The Yellow Springs Taoist simply walked step by step into the primal chaos palace, then looked at the various great masters with his stooped figure. What Yellow Springs Taoist? This king has never heard of him. Let this king see how capable you are. An earth-shattering roar came. A Daoyuo Jingxian with a dragon head and a human body rushed over with a dragon roar that could shatter the starry sky. Haha, this black dragon Taoist can't hold back anymore. In this Taoist's opinion, this black dragon Taoist is just picking up a soft persimmon. This so-called Yellow Springs Taoist is too weak. This is the perfect opportunity for this black dragon Taoist to show off his might. Do you know who this Yellow Springs Taoist is? Voices of discussion came from all sides. Obviously, this Yellow Springs Taoist wasn't famous, and the various great masters didn't know much about him. This little evil dragon is really courting death. He actually dares to find trouble with the Yellow Springs Taoist. Outside the Primal Chaos Palace, Peng Mo's face was gloomy. He looked at the Black Dragon Taoist as if he was looking at a dead man. In the Chaos Dojo, the Black Dragon Taoist had just entered the dojo. He looked at the Yellow Springs Taoist with disdain and said, "What Yellow Springs Taoist? If you surrender obediently," whoosh. All of a sudden, a gust of cold wind blew past. The Black Dragon Taoist stopped talking, and his eyes were glazed over. What happened next stunned all the powerful cultivators and made them tremble in fear. Taoist Wulong's sturdy body crumbled like sand. His plump flesh withered and turned into a skeleton in a few breaths' time. His primordial spirit in his sea of consciousness let out a shriek before it shattered into golden light that filled the sky. A strong wind blew past, and the skeleton body of the Black Dragon Taoist turned into dust. It disappeared quietly between heaven and earth, leaving no trace behind. Everything was silent, and the starry sky was silent. When this strange scene appeared, there was no sign of life in the starry sky. After a dozen breaths, all kinds of gasps could be heard. No one knew what had happened, and no one knew why the Black Dragon Taoist had fallen. However, all the great masters knew that the Black Dragon Taoist's death must have something to do with the Yellow Springs Taoist. What a terrifying divine power! Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void and looked at the Yellow Springs Taoist with a solemn expression. If he were to compare the Yellow Springs Taoist with Shen Tu, Yi Xian was sure that the Yellow Springs Taoist was much more powerful than Shen Tuesday. This kind of strength was not in terms of cultivation, but in terms of combat prowess and divine ability. Although Taoist Black Dragon was only at the 5th heavenly layer of Grand Luo realm, he was able to kill him silently. Taoist Yellow Springs' method was superior to Shen Tu's. The Yellow Springs Taoist is indeed worthy of his reputation. If I were to fight against him, I might not be able to gain an advantage. Rakimo murmured with a solemn expression. Cough, cough, cough. The Yellow Springs Taoist coughed a few times in the center of the Primal Chaos Dojo. He still looked like a dying man, and there was no aura around him. However, his hoarse and old voice sounded. "Is there anyone else who would like to spar with me? A worthy younger brother, to kill my Black Dragon Taoist. I would like to see what kind of despicable means you used." Chapter 553. The starry skies roared as the sea of stars churned. A green light suddenly appeared in the center of the Chaos Tao field as a green-robed Taoist pointed his immortal sword at the Yellow Spring Taoist. Clang! Clang! Without any nonsense, the green-robed Taoist stabbed out with his sword. The sky-splitting sword radiance surged out like a river of stars, sweeping towards the Yellow Spring Taoist. The Yellow Spring Path, the sorrow of forgetfulness, spirits of the 9 underworlds, do not turn back. The Yellow Spring Taoist chanted as the Chaos Tao field shook. A dim and turbid radiance shot out from his aged fingertip, instantly drowning the sky-splitting sword radiance. Wung! The sword radiance dissipated as the spirits of the dead wailed. The dim yellow radiance covered the green-robed Taoist as his entire being was fixed in the void. Just like the Black Dragon Taoist, his eyes glazed over before his body crumbled like sand, disappearing into the starry skies. It was terrifying to the extreme. 2 Daoyuo Jingxian had ended up with their souls dispersing. This made all the powerful experts shudder in fear, as they looked at the Yellow Spring Taoist with extreme fear. The Daoyuo Jingxian was not a pig that could be slaughtered as one wished. Even if one was a realm higher than the other, it was still very difficult to completely kill the Daoyuo Jingxian. However, the Yellow Spring Taoist was too strange. His abilities were extremely bizarre. Not only did he silently kill 2 grand heavenly immortals, he did it with extreme ease. How could the crowd not feel fear? The death of 2 Daoyuo Jingxian in a row made the Yellow Spring Taoist the representative of death. After that, no one else stepped forward. Clearly, they were all frightened by the Yellow Spring Taoist's methods. The Yellow Spring Taoist bowed and trembled as he cupped his hands towards the various powerful experts. Then he stood quietly in the center of the Chaos Tao field. After a year, no one challenged him. Only then did the Yellow Spring Taoist walk down from the Chaos Tao field, becoming the second victor. Clang! Sword Demon stepped out, holding a sword wrapped in black cloth in his hand. Demonic lotuses revolved around him, and the destructive demonic sword gleam was enough to send chills down the spines of those who looked at it. The Sword Demon's name and origin were unknown. He only had one battle in his life, and it was the earth-shattering battle with Mahamayuri. Although he was defeated in the end, his name still resounded throughout Daoyo Jingxian. Rumor has it that the fallen demon sword is capable of destroying heaven and earth. Sword Demon, please enlighten me. Purple chi came from the east, and the sound of swords soared into the clouds. A purple-robed Taoist walked over with a sword on his back. His aura of righteousness filled the entire starry sky. Even the sword chi around him was tearing through the void. He was truly a peerless sword immortal. Die! Chi! The Sword Demon's face was cold and emotionless. Before the Taoist entered the Chaos Tao field, he didn't even use the sword in his hand. He merely pointed his sword finger, and a destructive pitch-black sword light cut through the void and slashed toward the Taoist. A sword that could sever life and death, and separate the head from the body. The Sword Demon had turned his finger into a sword, and it was as if the 9 heavens and the Milky Way were draped over. The Taoist's expression changed drastically. In his panic, he performed a sword art, trying to block the destructive attack. Crack! The purple-robed Taoist's immortal sword shattered inch by inch. A demonic sword light flashed across the starry sky. The purple-robed Taoist watched in horror as his eyes were dyed red with blood. His head and body were cut in half. Puffed! A sword that could sever life and death, and separate the head from the body. This wasn't just a saying. It was the Sword Demon's killing move, and it also severed the purple Taoist's waist. Blood spurted out from his waist and scattered in the starry sky. Bang! The 2 halves of the corpse fell onto the Chaos Tao field. Even the primordial spirit of the purple Taoist was annihilated by the sword. He didn't even have the chance to reincarnate. From the beginning to the end, the Sword Demon didn't move, and the fallen demon's sword in his hand never left its scabbard. However, his attack made the faces of the various great mediums turn pale, and they all let out a long sigh. The Sword Demon's power was too terrifying. He was worthy of being the Tongtian great mediums, who fought with Mahamayuri. This also extinguished the flames in the hearts of those who were eager to try, who would dare to go up the stage and fight the Sword Demon. A year had passed, and no one went up the stage. The Sword Demon naturally became the 3rd winner. However, when he walked down the stage, he took a deep look at Yi Xian, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Why don't all of you give the 4th spot to me? When the Sword Demon left the stage, the immortal Wang of the South Pole quietly appeared in the Chaos Tao field. He had a warm smile on his face, as he cupped his hands and bowed to the various great mediums. The immortal Wang of the South Pole was one of the 2 vice sect masters of the Chanism. He was also Yuanshi Tianzuan's last disciple. His cultivation was at the 9 heavens of Daoyo 9 heavens. Whether it was his foundation or his cultivation, it was extremely terrifying. As the saying went, it's good to have a big tree to back you up. The immortal Wang of the South Pole was an orthodox Taoist, and he was also Yuanshi Tianzuan's disciple. Naturally, the various great mediums had to give him face. Naturally, no one challenged the immortal Wang of the South Pole. This also made him the 4th winner. He then walked down the Chaos Tao field with a smile. Time passed by slowly year after year. From the 5th year onwards, the battle in the Chaos Tao field began to become more intense. This was because the people who came up later were not as terrifying and unstoppable as the previous 4. This allowed the various great mediums to display their full strength and start one earth-shattering battle after another. The immortal light of Daoyuo erupted, great demonic arts were used, and ghost Dao abilities were used to kill people without leaving a trace. As time passed, the victors constantly walked down the stage, but they all quickly took pills to recover. It was clear that under this method of attrition, if one did not have the strength to crush everyone, they would only die of exhaustion. Even the victors would suffer great injuries. 15 years passed in the blink of an eye. During this time, There were great mediums who stubbornly defended the stage and emerged as victors with great difficulty. There were also those who took advantage of the situation, easily defeating the defenders at the last moment and snatching the fruits of their labor. The rock demon took the stage in the 7th year. With his fierce reputation, he only needed to kill a few blind Daluo Jinxian to easily advance to the next round. On the 16th year, the final victor would be decided. However, there were still several hundred Daluo Jinxian who had not taken the stage, so the final battle would be abnormally intense. Big brother, if you still don't take action, you'll probably have to give up your spot in the last round. The rock demon smiled as if he was kindly reminding Yi Xian. At the same time, countless gazes gathered on Yi Xian. These were the gazes of the various great mediums. The strongest 4 among them were Yi Xian. Everyone knew that Yi Xian was the new celestial emperor, and he had personally killed the Jade Emperor and Queen Mother. He had received the great support of the Jia lineage, and when he ascended to the throne, he had forced Duobao Rulai to submit to him. There were many legends about Yi Xian, and all of them were extremely daring. It could be said that everyone in the 3 realms was familiar with him. Chapter 554. However, legends were just legends. Yi Xian didn't have any dazzling battle achievements. Among the Daluo Jinxian, he had only killed some early-stage grand heavenly realm existences. Many people present could kill an early-stage Daluo Jinxian, so they naturally wouldn't fear Yi Xian. There were even some people who hoped that Yi Xian would quickly come down from the arena. If they could defeat Yi Xian, they would gain a great reputation, even if they couldn't marry the Empyrean fairy. This was also the plan of the various great experts. Everyone was watching coldly from the sidelines. This was the attitude of the various great experts because in their hearts, Yi Xian was too far away from the strongest 4. Although he was the celestial emperor of the 3 realms, the aura he revealed was only at the 4th heavenly layer of the grand heavenly realm. Naturally, the various great experts wouldn't pay too much attention to him. Anyone who stepped into the 2nd watershed of the grand heavenly realm was already a revered existence in the 3 realms. They didn't care about the so-called status. Everything depended on their cultivation and combat strength. Yi Xian was dressed in black. He sat cross-legged in the starry sky, 3,000 black strands of hair draped behind his head. There wasn't the slightest ripple around him. When he slowly opened his eyes, he stood up from the starry sky and strolled towards the Primal Chaos Dojo. Yi Xian stood at the center of the Primal Chaos Dojo with his hands behind his back. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was like 2 great stars were rotating. He calmly looked at the various great experts. Yi Xian came down from the arena and attracted the attention of everyone. Regardless of Yi Xian's cultivation, he was destined to be the center of attention, since he was the celestial emperor of the 3 realms. Moreover, the Empyrean fairy smiled at him when the event started. How could this not make the various great experts view Yi Xian as a thorn in their side? Yi Tiandi, there's only 1 spot left in the 1st round. If you lose here, you and I will not be fated to be together. In the starry sky, the Empyrean fairy was smiling sweetly at Yi Xian. However, there was a trace of craftiness in her eyes, and there was even a faint playful smile on her lips. It would be a joke to say that the Empyrean fairy had fallen in love with Yi Xian. Her feelings for Yi Xian were extremely complicated. First of all, Yi Xian had taken her virginity, and she couldn't kill him. Even if she could kill Yi Xian was her first man, so she couldn't do it. Moreover, Niwa had once told her that Yi Xian was very likely to be the 7th saint of heaven. Even if she married Yi Xian, it wouldn't be a disgrace to her status. However, the Empyrean fairy was also slightly worried. If Yi Xian wasn't the saint of heaven and died here today, wouldn't she have to marry someone else? This was not the outcome she wanted. When these complicated emotions intertwined, the Empyrean fairy's mind was in a mess. She inadvertently felt some resentment towards Yi Xian, which led to the current scene. From the beginning to the end, the Empyrean fairy remained high and mighty. She had never spoken to any of the competitors, but when Yi Xian took the stage, she spoke softly. This immediately made Yi Xian the target of everyone. Unfortunately, Yi Xian directly ignored the Empyrean fairy, treating her like air. This was because in Yi Xian's eyes, the Empyrean fairy was only a tool for him, Yi Xian. He had no feelings for her at all. The Empyrean fairy was stunned by Yi Xian's disregard. Her beautiful face became filled with shame and anger. She could only glare hatefully at Yi Xian and remain silent. The celestial emperor of the three realms. What a great reputation. Let me see what makes you dare to participate in this event. Suddenly, a voice as heavy as a mountain rang out. The starry sky within 10,000 kilometers shook as a 20-meter-tall giant stepped through the starry sky. His towering body gave off an extremely great pressure. King Taishan, a powerful cultivator, recognized the newcomer and exclaimed in surprise. King Taishan's original form was a mountain spirit. His cultivation was at the 6th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm. Although his abilities were ordinary, his physique was renowned among the Daluo Jinxian. His physique was his strongest ability. Bang! Like a divine mountain crashing into the world, like a falling star. When King Taishan stepped onto the chaotic Dao field, a loud rumble resounded throughout the area. At this moment, he displayed an extremely terrifying might. One was as heavy as a mountain, while the other was 7 feet tall. King Taishan's body was so huge that Yi Xian was like a 3-year-old compared to him. This created a great contrast between the two. Rumor has it that Yi Tiandi's battle prowess is heaven-defying. Even in the face of the 3rd Grand Immortal Realm, he is undefeatable. This king scoffs at this rumor. Today, I would like to ask for your guidance. King Taishan's voice was so loud that it echoed throughout the starry sky. He looked at Yi Xian with a hint of mockery in his eyes. As a figure at the 6th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm, King Taishan could naturally sense that Yi Xian's cultivation was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm. He was 2 realms higher than Yi Xian, so he didn't believe the rumor that Yi Xian could go against the 3rd Grand Immortal Realm. Scram! A simple word came out of Yi Xian's mouth. He didn't even look at King Taishan. Why would Yi Xian care about such an ignorant ant? Brat, are you courting death? Although Yi Xian was the celestial emperor of the 3 realms, his cultivation was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm. How could King Taishan not be enraged by Yi Xian's attitude? Die! King Taishan swung a pair of giant palms that were like clouds hanging down from the sky. The terrifying power that could crush mountains and rivers bloomed as it violently slammed down on Yi Xian. Such a scene immediately attracted the attention of all the powerful experts. Although King Taishan wasn't a powerful figure, Yi Xian was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm. All the powerful experts wanted to know how Yi Xian would withstand this attack. Not only were all the powerful experts watching this battle, but the 4 strongest experts were also looking at Yi Xian. Ever since Yi Xian appeared in front of the 4 of them, they faintly felt a sense of oppression. Although the oppression was faint, the 4 of them believed in their intuition that Yi Xian wasn't that simple. Bang! The starry sky exploded and rippled in all directions. King Taishan's palm slammed down, causing the entire chaotic Dao field to shake violently. He even suppressed Yi Xian under his palm. A sinister smile bloomed on his fierce-looking face. But before King Taishan could retract his smile, his expression suddenly froze. His face instantly flushed red, and he suddenly let out a shrill scream. Ah! Thump! Thump! King Taishan frantically retreated. Terrifying bloody holes appeared on his giant palms as a large amount of blood gushed out. Suddenly, without waiting for King Taishan to retreat, Yi Xian put one hand behind his back, his expression cold and emotionless. He didn't release any immortal light, but when he stretched out his right palm, the starry sky trembled violently as an extremely terrifying suction force acted on King Taishan. Come! Yi Xian lightly smiled. However, his smile was extremely cold. What happened next caused all the experts to be dumbstruck and speechless. Their bodies and minds were slightly trembling. Bzz! The stars shifted and the sun and moon reversed. King Taishan roared in shock, but his body was no longer under his control. An extremely terrifying power pulled him toward Yi Xian. Thump! 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 Like the beating of a war drum, or the reversal of the 9 heavens, Yi Xian stepped into the air, ripples rising from beneath his feet. His right palm faintly glowed as he pulled King Taishan in front of him, his jade-white finger silently pressing down on King Taishan's forehead. Your life is that of an ant. You do not know the might of the heavens. Die. Bang. Yi Xian coldly smiled. His palm and fingers glowed, the origin immortal light that contained the terrifying power of his origin immortal body. This world-destroying power was exerted on King Taishan's forehead, causing him to suffer a calamity of death. Chapter 555. Crack. With Lord Taishan's head as the starting point, his skull was crumbling inch by inch. His ghastly white skull bones were revealed, and his body was cracking like a spider web. His so-called powerful body of flesh and blood turned into streaks of blood mist. It was an extremely horrifying sight, and no one could look straight at it. Ah no, don't kill me. King Taishan's nascent divinity was screaming and begging for mercy, but his body had already collapsed, leaving only a huge set of white bones. The white bones were still covered with blood and flesh, making people feel great fear when they looked at them. Bam! Yi Xian was calm and silent. A cold light flashed through his eyes. Under the force of his palm, an earth-shattering explosion sounded out. King Taishan's pale white bones exploded into dust that filled the sky and drifted away with the wind. Even his primordial spirit didn't leave behind the slightest trace. Yi Xian had only used one strike to destroy King Taishan's soul. He would no longer exist in the three realms. If he had known that Yi Xian was so terrifying, he would never have dared to fight with Yi Xian. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret. When King Taishan stepped onto the Chaos battlefield, he was destined to die. No one could walk out of the Chaos Dao field alive from Yi Xian's hands. Above the Chaos Dao field, in the boundless starry sky, Yi Xian's black hair hung behind his head. When the astral winds blew, his hair fluttered in the wind. His black robe fluttered, and his eyes were spinning like stars as he looked down at the various great masters. Yi Xian appeared very calm, as if he had done something very casual. However, when he looked at the four strongest people, their expressions changed slightly. A cold glint appeared in their eyes. As the Heavenly Emperor, I shall suppress all enemies in the world. This was Yi Xian's Heavenly Emperor aura, and it was fully displayed at this moment. Even though his cultivation base was only at the fourth heaven of Grand Luo, he had no fear in the face of a peak Grand Luo. Interesting. Shin Tu grinned from the sidelines, his arms crossed as he stared at Yi Xian, but a fiery light quietly flashed across his eyes, replaced by a kind of hostility. Cough cough cough. Taoist Yellow Spring coughed softly and nodded to Yi Xian. His wrinkled and skinny old face showed a smile, but it was an unfathomable smile. No one knew if he was laughing at Yi Xian, or if his smile was just like that. Pretentious. The celestial being of the South Pole sneered, and looked at Yi Xian with contempt. The so-called sword demon was silent, but when he looked at Yi Xian, his eyes revealed an indescribable desire to fight. Their various attitudes were reflected in Yi Xian's eyes, and this caused a wisp of a strange smile to curl up on the corners of his mouth. He strolled through the starry sky and stood once more within the Chaos Dao right. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. Yi Xian's killing of King Taishan with a single finger had directly placed boundless pressure on all the great powers. Because everyone had underestimated Yi Xian's strength, they all felt a sense of oppression in their hearts. At this point, the various great practitioners finally understood that Yi Xian's ability to ascend to the position of Heavenly Emperor wasn't because of the support of the Grand Master of Heaven. This had a lot to do with his own cultivation. However, there was one thing that the various great practitioners couldn't understand. Ever since the creation of the world, although it wasn't impossible to say that there weren't any people who could fight across a large realm, they were still extremely rare. However, a person with terrifying battle prowess like Yi Xian could simply be called an eternal monster. Yi Tindi, I'll take you on. Suddenly, a streak of light streaked across the starry sky, and a white-robed man entered the Chaos Dao right. The immortal light of the origin immortal realm enveloped him, and a great immortal technique quickly condensed in his hands. The laws of the world also revolved around him, and he looked at Yi Xian with a solemn expression. Sword Saint Vast Sun. Someone recognized this person. He was a terrifying figure at the 7th heavenly layer of the Origin Immortal realm. Although Sword Saint Vast Sun was only at the 7th heavenly layer of the Origin Immortal realm, he was still someone at the 3rd watershed. He was not someone that King Taishan could compare to. The crowd was stirred up as they watched with rapt attention. When Sword Saint Vast Sun and Yi Xian faced off, all the great powers were excited. They all hoped that Sword Saint Vast Sun could slay Yi Xian. Clang! 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 Tongtian's sword light stirred up the sea of stars. Sword Saint Vast Sun did not waste any time. He directly performed the Tongtian sword art, condensing a sea of sword light into his hand. When he slashed down at Yi Xian, the destructive sword light covered the entire chaos downright. Crack! Metal clashed and sword rays exploded. No one could see what was happening in the Dao field of primal chaos, but when the sky-blotting sword rays dissipated, everyone could see the result of the battle. The eyes of all the great masters were filled with fear, as if they had fallen into a nightmare and were unable to wake up for a long time. In the center of the chaos downright, the vast Sun Immortal sword had been broken into two. A terrifying hole appeared on Sword Saint Vast Sun's chest. Large amounts of blood flowed out of his mouth uncontrollably. His vitality was rapidly dissipating. A right arm was slowly pulled out of Sword Saint Vast Sun's chest. The beautiful blood dyed Yi Xian's arm red. When Yi Xian completely retracted his arm, he was holding a burning immortal heart in his hand. Puff! Under the horrified gazes of all the great powers, Yi Xian smiled savagely. He actually crushed the immortal heart in his hand, causing Sword Saint Vast Sun to cry out in pain. However, this was not the end. Just when everyone thought that Yi Xian was going to stop, he suddenly extended his right hand and grabbed Sword Saint Vast Sun's neck. He lifted Sword Saint Vast Sun into the air like he was lifting a chick. What are you doing? Sword Saint Vast Sun's face was as pale as paper. His eyes were filled with fear and shock. Blood constantly flowed out of his mouth, but he still asked in a weak, trembling voice. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer his question. Instead, a vicious smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. Crack! With a crisp sound, Sword Saint Vast Sun's tibia broke. Sword Saint Vast Sun let out a miserable cry before he died. Yi Xian had actually broken his neck while he was still alive. His fleeing soul had been crushed in Yi Xian's hand. Bang! Yi Xian tossed Sword Saint Vast Sun's corpse to the ground like he was throwing away trash. When he kicked out, he caused the lifeless corpse to turn into a bloody mist. His cruel and brutal methods were terrifying to the extreme. Cold and emotionless, cruel and brutal, sinister and vicious. This was the attitude that Yi Xian displayed right now. This also caused all the great powers to fall silent. However, their gazes towards Yi Xian were clearly filled with fear. Actually, there was no need for Yi Xian to act so cruelly. He could have just killed Sword Saint Vast Sun directly. There was no need for him to do something so bloody. However, Yi Xian had always believed in one principle, which was that he had to be ruthless and kill the chicken to warn the monkey. If he showed even the slightest mercy, it would only make more and more people think that he was easy to bully. They would definitely step forward one by one to fight him. This would also annoy him to no end. Chapter 556. Sure enough, when Yi Xian displayed such a cruel and brutal attitude, it instantly caused the various great experts to feel fearful, and no one else stepped forward. Clearly, they were afraid that they would be no match for Yi Xian and die miserably at his hands. After all, even Sword Immortal Vast Yang, who was at the 7th level of the All-Heaven Immortal Realm, had perished. Most of the people present would simply be courting death if they stepped forward to fight Yi Xian. Silence, stillness, silent suppression. The various great experts were silent, but an extremely heavy atmosphere was spreading. They looked at each other, while hesitation and coldness flashed within their eyes. This state lasted for an entire 7 days. Yi Xian had miscalculated something. He originally thought that the lightning strike would definitely cause the various great experts to hesitate, and he would be able to smoothly obtain the final spot. However, Yi Xian had never imagined that it was precisely because the 16 years were about to expire that only this final spot remained in the first round. This caused some people who were unwilling to accept this to arouse the intention to take the risk. As mentioned before, all the great experts that could participate in the grand meeting of Niwa Palace were not nameless figures. No matter if it was in terms of cultivation or ability, they could be called outstanding in the 3 dimensions. So how could they be willing to lose this final spot? Moreover, even though Yi Xian seemed to have easily annihilated 2 all-heaven immortals, in the eyes of the various great experts, Yi Xian had definitely exhausted an extremely great amount of his cultivation. This caused some people with ill intentions to arouse cold killing intent towards Yi Xian. Yi Tiandi really does possess unparalleled combat strength. I'd like to seek guidance from you. A crimson-clothed Taoist strode through the starry sky while scarlet young skyfire blazed around him. He was a terrifying figure at the 7th level of the all-heaven immortal realm as well. However, he maintained a distance of 5,000 kilometers from Yi Xian, while various treasures revolved around him. Obviously, he had already observed Yi Xian's terrifying body for a long time. If he were to engage in close combat with Yi Xian, he would definitely suffer a calamity of life and death. At this moment, Yi Xian frowned and came to a sudden realization. He had miscalculated and should have stepped forward earlier. There was only 1 spot left in this final battle, so how could the various great experts give it up so easily? However, Yi Xian was a person who did not know how to write the word regret. Since there were people who were not afraid of death, he would just kill them one by one. Rumble! Treasures hovered in the sky as the starry sky exploded. Another great battle began. The crimson-clothed Taoist had begun, and he had been on his guard against Yi Xian since the beginning. He had concealed himself as he unleashed various great immortal realm techniques. He had indeed caused Yi Ye's great trouble. After all, the 3rd watershed of the all-heaven immortal realm was not just for words. It was an extremely terrifying battle prowess. Yi Xian was able to kill Sword Immortal Vast Sun because he had fought him head-on. However, the crimson-clothed Taoist had withdrawn after a single clash, not wanting to fight him head-on at all. Instead, he kept unleashing great immortal realm techniques in an attempt to exhaust Yi Xian's cultivation. The crimson-clothed Taoist's thoughts were very simple. He believed that Yi Xian's cultivation must have been greatly exhausted after fighting 2 all-heaven immortals in a row. As long as he fought carefully and kept exhausting Yi Xian's cultivation, it would be the best time for him to defeat Yi Xian. Unfortunately, while the crimson-clothed Taoist's thoughts were good, he did not know that Yi Xian cultivated the undying immortal scripture. His all-heaven immortal body and indestructible origin spirit were even more terrifying. His recovery speed was also not something an ordinary Daoyo Jinxian could compare to. His wishful thinking could only be described as wishful thinking. Bang! The giant palm that blotted out the sky instantly shattered the crimson-clothed Taoist's body and origin spirit. Amidst a shrill cry of unwillingness, the crimson-clothed Taoist died tragically in Yi Xian's hands. However, this battle lasted for an entire month. After all, the crimson-clothed Taoist was a 7th-layer all-heaven immortal. Even Yi Xian had to expend a great deal of effort to kill him. The tragic death of another all-heaven immortal left all the powerful experts speechless. However, when they saw that Yi Xian had used more than a month to kill the crimson-clothed Taoist, some of them believed that Yi Xian's cultivation had been greatly depleted, and that this was the best time to defeat him. Buzz! A Tongtian great demon entered the battlefield. Without any nonsense, the terrifying Tongtian demonic technique was unleashed and suppressed Yi Xian with unparalleled violent killing intent. Tongtian Great Demon dead. Azure Immortal dead. Mountainshade Old Demon dead. Immortal Lord Hunhai dead. All the experts that had stepped into the 7th level of the all-heaven immortal realm entered the arena one after another, causing the entire starry sky to tremble to the extreme. Because everyone thought that Yi Xian was about to be exhausted, and it was a great opportunity to defeat him. However, the result every single time was Yi Xian killing them. Time flowed like water, and a year was about to arrive. The Chaos Dao field was filled with the corpses of various great experts. Not only were there existences at the 7th level of Grand Heavenly Realm, but there were also many figures at the 2nd watershed of Grand Heavenly Realm. Obviously, these great divine abilities of the 2nd watershed of the Golden Immortal Realm were all people who took advantage of the situation. When they thought that Yi Xian was about to be exhausted, they all went up to fight him. But in the end, they died miserably on the spot. Blood, slaughter, cruelty, and brutality. These were the names that Yi Xian was synonymous with. None of those who dared to enter the Chaos Dojo could survive from Yi Xian's hands. There were only 7 days left before the 1-year deadline was about to expire. All the powerful experts were deathly silent, and no one dared to enter the battlefield to fight Yi Xian. This was because the center of the Chaos Dojo was already filled with corpses. There were dozens of them, and this made Yi Xian a synonym for terror. At this moment, Yi Xian's black clothes covered his body, and the immortal light around him was slightly weak. Even though he cultivated the undying immortal scripture, fighting with these zenith heavens in turns had caused his cultivation to be greatly depleted, and he even felt a trace of weakness. Haha! All of a sudden, the 9 heavens' divine flames spread out, illuminating the boundless starry skies. Unbridled laughter echoed in all directions as a golden sun rose from the crowd. Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance strolled through the starry skies towards Yi Xian, looking at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a dead man. Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance. The crowd was in an uproar. On that day, the Heavenly Monarch stepped into the primal Chaos Dao field and confronted Yi Xian. This caused the various experts to be astonished as they watched, and their eyes were filled with excitement. Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance, you truly are a scheming person. Outside the battlefield, Peng Emo smiled. He was not surprised by Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance's appearance. Clearly, he had a grudge with Yi Xian in the ancient path of stars. If he was in Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance's place, he would have attacked Yi Xian as well. Yi Xian is in big trouble. Shen Tu slowly shook his head, looking at Yi Xian with pity. Rascal, Sword Demon sneered. Clearly, he despised Heavenly Lord Solar Brilliance's shameless actions. Cough, cough, cough. Yellow Spring Taoist coughed softly and shook his head without saying anything. He only looked at Yi Xian with a hint of doubt in his eyes before his gaze fell silent again. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.